Chapter 258. Fang felt that money earned while lying on the bed was not peaceful. Li did not agree with this statement. Earning money while lying on the bed was also a kind of ability. With Fang's physique, he would definitely have a bright future in this industry. Although compared to the future, the overall atmosphere of today's society was more conservative. As long as he stood on the street holding a sign, he would definitely attract many lonely noble women who would send their maids to secretly give him an invitation. Finally, he knew why old Fang had been depressed for the past few days. He was purely idle. Do you know why this money is not peaceful for you? Li looked at him and asked. Fang looked up at Li with a confused expression. Have you ever seen second uncle sit under the tree outside and take a nap for the whole day? Li looked at him and asked. Fang nodded. These days he would occasionally sit under the tree and stare blankly. Second uncle would take a nap for the whole day and he would stare blankly for the whole day. However, why did the son-in-law ask him this? Have you ever seen Mrs. Su go out early in the morning and come back late at night carrying candied haws? Li continued to ask. Fang nodded again. Although Rui Lu's profits were greater, some women were bored at home and would go out every day to sell candied haws without a break. Have you ever seen the sun rise from the east roof and set from the west roof? Li finally asked. The expression on Fang's face was even more puzzled. He did not know why the son-in-law asked these things, but he still nodded mechanically. This is where your problem lies. Li threw the bag of money to him and said, Why are you looking at things all day instead of working hard? Take the money back and call a few people over later. There's work and don't think about being idle in the future. Li realized that not everyone could be as carefree and at ease as he was. For people like old Fang, he had to find something for him to do in order to be at peace. The closer it was to the end of the year, the colder the weather became. He lit the stove in the room, but it was still so cold that he couldn't even stretch out his hand. He planned to make a Kong in the kitchen. Almost every house in the northern countryside had this thing. It was usually connected to the bottom of the stove. There was no need to deliberately add firewood to the fire. The heat generated from cooking every day was enough to keep the house warm for an entire day. If there was no warmth before going to bed at night, Grandma would bring a large pile of firewood, straw, or corn stalks from outside. Within a few minutes, her body would be warm. Because of this thing, when he lived in the countryside when he was young, he never had to worry about keeping warm in the winter. He would stay on the Kong for the whole winter eating and sleeping on it. This situation continued until he graduated from primary school. Ever since he went to middle school and moved from the countryside to the city, he never slept on the Kong again. It was winter and they had nothing to do. The whole family sat on the Kong and played cards to kill time. Fang soon came over with his men. There were more than a dozen families living in the stockade now. All of them stayed by his side in times of crisis. Li didn't treat them badly. He had already given them shares of Rui Du's profits. Recently he raised the shares of each family a little. These men had been very idle these days. After they moved out of the stockade they had nothing to do. The candied haws were a small business now. It was run by the family's in-laws and relatives. It was not appropriate for a man to get involved. Taking care of a child at home was not something a man should do. Fang only said that his son-in-law had something to do, and they all came over. It was just a Kong and 2 or 3 people were enough. With Fang and his men's labor they could make it today. The kitchen couldn't even accommodate more than a dozen people gathered together. Including Fang, there were 5 people left here. The others went back with a look of regret. Before they left, they even discussed with Fang and his men whether they could change, but Fang firmly refused. Son-in-law, tell me, what are you going to do this time? Fang rolled up his sleeves. At this time, even if Li asked him to climb a mountain of swords and plunge into a sea of fire to chop people on the street with a kitchen knife, he would probably do it. There was something to do, money was safe, and the knot in his heart was untied. Fang was revived on the spot. After knowing that the 6 men were busy in the kitchen, Fang's excitement was obviously reduced. He thought that they were going to do something big, but he found that the gap between his ideal and reality was too big. 2 of them went outside to buy bricks and stones, and the rest of them dismantled the original stove. The stove also needed to be changed. It was not easy to make a stove at this time. Xiao Huan was often choking in the kitchen and crying. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't light the fire. Because the ventilation was not good, when she lit the fire, she had to keep pulling the bellows next to her. It was very laborious. When Li was a child, the stove at home was also like this. His favorite thing to do was to go to the stove and help her add firewood and pull the bellows when his grandmother was cooking. Later, when the kitchen was rebuilt, it was changed to the new stove promoted by the state. Without the bellows, the ventilation was better, the ignition was faster, and it saved more materials. However, he couldn't find the feeling of giggling and pulling the bellows hard when he was a child. The Kong should be connected to the stove, which was basically the structure in the countryside at that time. When he was a child, he saw the craftsman build this thing, but when he recalled it now, of course it was impossible. After finding the drawings, Fong and the others violently dismantled the stove. After cleaning out the garbage, he had already drawn the drawings, including the specific size of each structure. This thing looked simple, but the size couldn't be wrong. If it was a little higher or a little shorter, there would be problems. "Young master, what is this thing?" Fong took the drawings back and forth, but he couldn't see anything. He scratched his head and looked at Li Yi and asked, "As long as you put this thing in your kitchen, Zhuzi won't complain about being cold at night?" Li Yi said simply and straightforwardly if he explained too much to Fong. "Okay, I'll do it tomorrow." Fong never doubted Li Yi's words. He heard from his young master that this thing was as warm as summer when he lay on it. At night, he could hug his wife and baby and sleep on this Kong, which was quite beautiful. "Old Su, it's a deal. Tomorrow I'll also get this thing for my house. Remember to come and help. If your house also wants to do it, call me." He patted the shoulder of a man next to him and said. When he was dismantling the stove, he wiped the black ash on his hands. Immediately, a big palm print appeared on Old Su's outer shirt. Fong's butt was kicked. The man scolded, "Son of a bitch, this was just washed by my wife. It's not easy to dry clothes in cold weather. When I go back, she will scold me again." Fong patted his butt and was not angry. He laughed and said, "Your wife is spoiled. If she dares to scold me, she will slap her." Old Su laughed and said, "I don't know who was beaten by his wife with a broom in the yard yesterday. By the way, who is Miss Hong? Why have I never heard you mention her? When did you hook up with her?" Fong's face suddenly turned red as if it was about to drip blood. In Old Su's proud eyes, he kicked him. "Fong Laos, and how dare you hit me? If you say one more word about Miss Hong, I will beat you again." "Okay, I can't beat you. I'll go and ask your wife what is going on with Miss Hong." Old Su sneered and strode outside. Fong was stunned for a moment. His face changed greatly and he immediately chased after him. His voice came from afar. "Old Su, brother Su, don't. Let's talk about it," Xiao Huan mumbled as she walked in from outside. She blinked her big eyes at Li Yi and asked, "Young master, who is Miss Xiao Hong?" Before Li Yi could answer, she could only find a familiar figure in her kitchen. It was still fine in the morning. She said in a panic, "How did our kitchen become like this?" Chapter 259. After explaining to the little maid for a long time, she finally believed that her kitchen did not attract evil thieves. Unable to find the money, she tore down the stove to vent her anger. Thinking about it, which stupid thief would look for valuable things in the kitchen? Her private money was all locked in a small box, and even the valuable jewelry bought by the son-in-law was all locked in it, hidden under the small bed in the room. She carried the key with her every day so it would not be lost. What was more, first miss and second miss were at home and no thief could come in. She was afraid that if she just sneaked into the house, before she had time to take a breath, Uncle Fong would break her legs and send her to the yamen. The treasure box was under the bed so it was very safe. But without the stove, where should she cook today? She would not worry about this later because the son-in-law said that after the new stove was built, it would not be so difficult to light a fire, and it would not always give out smoke, which made her run out several times to cook. It was said that it could also save firewood. Behind the stove there was a big bed which could sleep 4 people. The big bed was connected to the stove so it was warm at any time every day. When there was nothing to do during the day they could sit on it to keep warm. Xiao Huan imagined the scene of the whole family sleeping on the big bed, and her little face immediately turned red. Ignoring the blushing Xiao Huan who was lost in her thoughts, the little girl just liked to let her imagination run wild. Lao Feng and Lao Su had their arms around each other's shoulders and were playing with the mud outside. They did not look like they were at each other's throats just now. Seeing the flattering expression on his face, Li Yi knew that Feng was finished. His weakness was caught, and his status among the brothers would definitely plummet in the future. There might really be a Miss Hong in the Jade Courtyard, and it seemed that she had known Feng for a long time even before she knew him. In the past, his family was so poor that they could not eat, so it was impossible for them to know each other through prostitution. But every time he mentioned Miss Hong, Feng would blush and stammer. The relationship between them was definitely not as simple as a pure man and a woman. In any case, this was Feng's family business. Although Li Yi was full of curiosity, he did not say it, and he would not break the casserole to ask. Walking out of the yard, they did not go far before they heard the sound of reading from a small yard next to them. It was Qing teaching the children. A yard in the house was specially made as a school. Originally there were 2 rooms. After removing the middle wall, there was a big classroom, and the small yard outside was the playground. Although there were not many students to begin with, there were only about 20 girls, and it was enough to occupy 1 room. Mr. Qin, who had broken his leg and could only lie on the bed, said that it would be better for the school to be brighter and more comfortable for the children to sit in. Lao Feng and the others did not hesitate to tear down the wall in the middle. As early as in Willow Leaf Village, Mr. Qin was the teacher of the school. Of course, at that time, only children with the surname Liu were qualified to go to school. During the days when Li Yi was the teacher, under the attraction of Sun Wukong, the number of children from poor families gradually increased. Now the position of teacher was handed over to Qin. It could be seen that she was very diligent and was born to be a teacher. There were more than 20 children in the big house. As long as they were of the right age, she went to visit their homes and let them go to school. This was a good thing. Children were very naughty. In the past, they ran wild in the village, went into the river to catch crabs, climbed trees to dig out bird nests, and never made people feel at ease. Now that they moved here, they did not have to do these things anymore. The prefectural city was full of crooks and honest people. If they did not let them go out to play, the house would be turned upside down. No parent did not have a headache. Little Qin could help them look after their children, so there was no parent who wouldn't be willing. If the naughty child was playful and didn't want to go to school, they would slap him on the butt and ask if he wanted to go. If he didn't want to go, they would slap him again. After a few more slaps, he would be willing. At first, she thought she was looking for someone to look after the child, but a few days later, when the woman was playing with the money, the naughty child proudly pointed at a pile of copper coins and said that she had lost wrongly. 7 copper coins plus 8 copper coins should be 15 copper coins, not 14. The woman was stunned for a moment and gave the naughty child a good beating. 7 plus 8 was 14. She had remembered it clearly since she was young, so how could it be wrong? Counting his fingers and toes again, he realized that he had counted incorrectly. Surprised, she asked the naughty child when he learned to count. The naughty child teared up and said that it was Mr. Qin who taught him. The woman gave the naughty child a few copper coins and told him to buy some good food. Carrying the gift, she went to Qing's house. They had to thank little Qin. Both she and the child's father were boorish people and didn't know a single word. The pile of copper coins at home could only be counted for fun. If they were asked for specific numbers, they would be dumbfounded. But now, their child had only been in school for a few days and already knew how to count. If he knew a few more words, not only would he not have to take the county examination, even if his family met with a disaster in the future, he wouldn't have to starve to death. There had never been a case of a cultured person starving to death. Generations of people couldn't even read a few words. Their great-grandfather generation only knew how to use a saber to kill. Who would have thought that a cultured person would actually appear here? Their ancestral tombs were really emitting green smoke. The families who had sent their children to school all ran to Qing's house. They were not stingy at all with rice and meat. How could they not bring some gifts? Fang carried a stove and went in. The chimney was made of hollow bamboo and tied tightly together. From then on, this new type of stove had successfully been installed in all the families in the house. The honeycomb briquette was also ready. Uncle Han made a mold and pulled over a few carts of coal powder. Soon, the briquettes with holes on them were piled in front of each family's house. When Li Yi walked into Uncle Han's house, the old man was sitting in the yard, busy. It seemed that he was old and couldn't stay idle. Every time he came to Uncle Han's house, he had work to do. Only second uncle was different. Other than sunbathing and eating, there seemed to be nothing else that could interest him. "Young master, what are you making this time?" Hearing footsteps coming from the yard, Uncle Han raised his head and asked with a smile. He had spent his whole life as a carpenter, but he could only make wooden knives and wooden spears for naughty children. He felt a little regretful. He could only make the best use of his skills in Uncle Han's house. Since he had nothing to do, Uncle Han liked to make those strange things that Uncle Han asked him to make. However, Uncle Han was too polite. He gave money every time and often asked Xiao Huan to send rice and noodles over. The old man was the only one in the house. The silver biscuits hidden under the water tank in the kitchen could not be used up in this lifetime. Li Yi was actually embarrassed to trouble Uncle Han every time. However, Uncle Han was the only one around who had this skill. Besides, it was not easy for him to live alone. He definitely wouldn't want to give money to the old man for no reason. He could only find something for him to do from time to time. When he gave money he had to have a legitimate reason. Looking at the old man he smiled and said, "Just some small things." As he said that he took out the drawing in his arms. Looking at the small squares on it, Uncle Hans smiled and said, "Young master, you don't have to worry about it. I can make it in 2 days at most. It's not difficult to make these small squares. It's just that my eyes are not good now. I'm afraid that you have to find a young man with good eyesight to carve the words on it. Uncle Han, you just need to get these small squares out. I'll find someone else to carve the words," Li Yi said with a smile. Ever since he saw that Li Yi could use a sword to carve words on the wall that were the size of a fingernail, and her speed was so fast that Li Yi couldn't even see it clearly with his eyes, Li Yi felt that the job of carving on mahjong would belong to her. Chapter 260. Men from poor families were all good at everything. Raising pigs and horses, farming, building walls and building houses, there was nothing they couldn't do. Farming was a skill to make a living. If they didn't have money to hire a craftsman to build a house, they had to do it themselves. This was a skill passed down from generation to generation. Those who didn't learn it would have starved or frozen to death. Fong and the others moved very quickly. In just half a day, the stove and Kong that Li Yi wanted had already appeared in the kitchen. After measuring it, the size was exactly the same as his drawing. There was no problem with the principle. The Kong that had just been made couldn't be burned immediately. Otherwise it would crack. This problem wouldn't exist after 2 days of drying. The stove and the Kong were connected. Naturally they couldn't cook during these 2 days. Li Yi originally planned to solve the problem of eating in a restaurant outside. He didn't expect this idea to be opposed by Xiao Huan and Rui. Although his family didn't lack that bit of money, which decent family would go to a restaurant every day to eat? That was something only prodigal sons and prodigals would do. Rui workshop wasn't far from here. The kitchen there didn't lack anything. They had cooked there yesterday. They could just eat in the shop for the next 2 days. Li didn't have any objections. The brothel was just next to Rui workshop. He could discuss things with old man Sun on the way. Fong had already brought a few people to smash his own stove. He didn't even consider the problem of where they were going to eat today. The stove in the son-in-law's house had been smashed. How could his house not be smashed? Those who didn't smash would be fools. Who didn't understand that if they followed in the footsteps of the son-in-law, they would have food to eat and money to earn. They had been living like this for the past few days. Otherwise they would still be living in the village on the mountain. When Li Yi and his family were preparing to go to Rui workshop, Mrs. Fong was pointing at Fong's nose and scolding. "You're such a glutton. The stove at home is broken. Where are you going to cook today?" Fong's mother-in-law was full of anger. She washed the vegetables and was about to cook, but this guy ran in and smashed the stove. She was almost scared to death. The mother and son in the family relied on this man to survive. If he was crazy or hysterical, she and Juzi would not be able to live. What's wrong with eating at the intoxicated fragrance restaurant for a couple of days? It's not like our family lacks this bit of money. Fong retorted. It would have been better if he didn't say it, but the moment he did, Mrs. Fong got even angrier. Do you feel uneasy with so much money at home so you're thinking of ways to give it away? This morning you wanted to buy a performer, and now you want to go to Drunken Fragrance restaurant for a meal. You'll have to spend a few taels to eat there. Why don't you take a look at the kind of people who eat there? Sooner or later the family's savings will be used up by you, Fong retorted again. When Li Yi walked to the door of the house, he saw a broom flying out from the yard of Fong's house. Sure enough, you can't judge a book by its cover. One was an iron man who wouldn't frown even if a knife cut his body, and the other was a seemingly virtuous and dignified peasant woman. Suddenly, the dignified and virtuous woman turned into a female Tyrannosaurus, and the indomitable man turned into a good-for-nothing. What a sin. Once again he sighed at his luck. Although when they first met, Rui smashed the solid wooden table in front of him, and he didn't know how much fiercer she was than Mrs. Fong, but for the rest of the time she was a good housekeeper, a gentle and virtuous ideal wife. Although there was still a veil between them, it was still better than. Thinking of Fong's wailing under the broom, he quickly threw that possibility out of his mind. It was still early and there was just a touch of white in the east. There were always reasons to get up late in winter. Most people were still sleeping in their warm beds and were unwilling to get up. There were not many people in the tiled houses. Who would come here to watch a show in the early morning? The open brothels were empty, and the doors of the wine shops and tea houses were closed. Only a figure occasionally walked out of the brothels. His footsteps were weak, and he was still thinking about how good the girl's kung fu was last night. In one of the brothels, Sun Yun, who had just turned 15, got up very early. He put the rag in the warm water and quickly wiped the tables and chairs. He needed to wipe the tables and chairs clean before the brothels opened. There couldn't be any dirt on them. Then he boiled the hot water so that he could prepare tea for the customers at any time. He was only wrapped in a thin jacket, but his forehead was covered with fine sweat. The young man's body was not afraid of the cold. After working for an hour, he only felt that his body was steaming hot, and he didn't feel cold at all. He didn't do this work for free. Sister Ruoqing said that if he could get up so early every day and finish wiping the tables and boiling the hot water, she would give him 10 copper coins. She would pay him once a day. Thinking about the dozens of copper coins lying in the small money bag that he secretly hid, he thought that one day he would be able to save enough money to marry a wife. He wouldn't need his old grandfather to worry about him anymore. His heart was full of energy and the frequency of his hands also increased. He didn't even notice that his grandfather had walked behind him. Old Sun walked over and looked at him lovingly. He said, "Xiao Yun, rest for a while. There are still 2 hours before the brothels open." Sun Yun turned his head and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He grinned, revealing his white teeth. He said, "Grandpa, I'm not tired. I'm almost done. I still have to boil the water later." Then he continued with the work at hand. There were only 2 sets of tables and chairs to be wiped. He could rest for a while when he boiled the water later. Looking at the child's quick movements, Old Sun's old face showed a gratified expression. A diligent child wouldn't starve to death. Even if he were to lie in a coffin one day, Xiao Yun could live on alone. Of course, before he found a wife for his child and settled his marriage, he wouldn't be willing to close his eyes. If he could live to the day he held a great-grandson, he would die with a smile on his face. Looking at the empty brothel, Old Sun's face showed a trace of a smile. It didn't matter that there was no one now. He knew that it wouldn't be long before this place would be full of customers. The painted skin could still be performed for a period of time. When the number of customers gradually decreased, the number of performances of the painted skin would be reduced, and Ying Ning and a Chinese ghost story could officially appear on the stage. With Li around, there would be no shortage of such good stories, and of course the customers' tips would not be less. As a wandering actor, when did the future become so worth looking forward to? When a person was immersed in beautiful things for too long, he couldn't help but think of some sad things. Yesterday, a brothel outside the city collapsed, and an old friend of many years was crushed under it. Although he wasn't seriously injured, his old bones were probably lying in bed for at least 10 days to half a month before he could get out of bed. He could be considered to have made a name for himself, but there were still countless actors who found it very difficult to live. In the past 2 days, countless old friends had come to him, hoping to make a living here. However, the number of people here was indeed saturated, so Old Sun could only helplessly shake his head and refuse. He had been wandering around for a lifetime, so he could understand the situation of most actors the best. If there was anything he could help them with, he would not hesitate to help. However, he was small and weak. In the big environment, he couldn't change anything at all. Early in the morning, there was not a single customer in the brothel. Only Old Sun was sitting in the corner in a daze. Li walked over. Old Sun heard the footsteps, raised his head, and hurriedly stood up. Li waved his hand and motioned him to sit down. He asked with a smile, "How was business yesterday?" Old Sun smiled and said, "Very good. The reward I received is a little more than the day before yesterday. I haven't had time to send it to you." Yesterday was the second day of the painted skin stage play. Not only did the popularity not decrease, but it also rose. Old Sun had clearly felt that the space in the brothel was not enough. "Don't be so anxious. The money will be with you for now. You can pay me once every half a month or once a month." Li didn't come here early in the morning to ask for money. After a few greetings, he went straight to the point and said, "There is something I want to discuss with Old Sunday. Just call me Old Sunday." "What's the matter?" "Just tell me," Old Sun said hurriedly. "It's like this. You should have seen that this brothel can't accommodate many customers, so the profit is naturally not much. I want to recruit more actors and build such a brothel in and outside the city. I want to sign a contract with them. I can provide them with stories and scripts. As for how to distribute the profit, you can distribute it according to the proportion like we do, or you can give them a fixed monthly salary." Li looked at Old Sun and said, this wasn't an idea that came to him in the past 2 days. When Li saw the strange culture of the brothel for the first time, he had this idea. What he didn't lack were good stories and scripts. The library contained the essence of thousands of years of culture in Wuxia. It was almost inexhaustible and he couldn't use it all in his life. After seeing the celebrities who made money so much that their hands cramped, and then looking back at their miserable predecessors, he always felt strange in his heart. Li was very interested in making a small change in this industry. In addition to this reason, he was also happy to see the poor people at the bottom of society live a better life. Many people were intoxicated by their graceful dance and long sleeves. They were the creators of art, but when people appreciated art, they imposed a lot of suffering and humiliation on the creators of art. This was unfair. Of course, there were some reasons that were not known to outsiders. When the entertainment industry in this world began to flourish, the lowly actors became the idols in people's hearts. A name written casually could be sold at a sky-high price. Wherever they went, they could hear the cheers of fans. People knew which actor's dance was the best in the world, and their singing was unparalleled. They didn't know who the emperor of the country was. This kind of scene always brought back some memories in the depths of his heart. Living in this world, both material and spiritual enjoyment were indispensable. When people were no longer hungry, they would pursue a higher level of spiritual pleasure. This could be seen from the Painted Skin stage play, which was always sold out. This was a huge cake, a cake that had not been noticed by people yet. He had to seize the opportunity before others discovered it. Of course, after recognizing the particularity of the brothel, Li didn't intend to give up the opportunity to control the invisible power in his hands. This world was too unsafe. If he didn't have enough power in his hands, he could be crushed like an ant at any time. In the past few months, the peaceful life in Willow Leaf Village was gone forever. There had been earth-shaking changes. He always felt a little guilty if he still lived as carelessly as before. "Child, what did you just say?" The old man thought that he had heard it wrong, and even his voice was a little trembling. Before Li spoke, he asked again, "Are you willing to accept those poor people who wander around and give them food?" The old man's voice was still a little trembling, for fear that he had misunderstood. Whether those wandering performers could fill their stomachs depended entirely on luck. If they met a generous customer, they wouldn't have to starve for a long time. If the customer only watched the performance and didn't give money, they would have to tighten their belts for the next few days. When did people from Luchi get a fixed salary? Li was a little puzzled as to why the old man had suddenly become so agitated. Since the stage play Painted Skin had such good ratings, when Journey to the West and Legend of the White Snake came out, who knew how shocked these country bumpkins who had never seen the world would be? This was a business that would not lose money at all. It was too ridiculous to rely on other people's money to eat. Some people didn't even need to pay a penny to watch a performance. After watching, they left. No one thought that this method was unreasonable. Each person had one ticket and they could sit according to the number. It was so simple and convenient. If he wanted to completely change this industry, he couldn't do it overnight. He temporarily suppressed these thoughts and looked at the old man who was staring at him with excited eyes. He said, "What do you think about giving them 500 cents a month?" "That's too much, too much." Old man's son was so excited that his beard trembled. In this industry, it was already a blessing from the heavens to be able to eat their fill. Most people didn't even dare to dream of receiving 500 cents a month. If they didn't do this kind of good thing, they would be kicked in the head by a donkey. You can discuss this with Miss Wan first. You can first call some people to try it out. It's not certain whether it will succeed or not. Remember to choose people who know everything. For now, don't send money over. You guys use my share first. If it's not enough, then we'll talk about it. Old man's son patted his chest and promised, "Don't worry, young master. Leave this matter to me. I will definitely do it properly for you." Old man's son's face turned red. This was a good thing for the many performers in Qing and Prefecture. He was very happy that these people in the same industry could have a meal. Li raised his head and looked at the stage covered by the curtain. There was a look of anticipation in his eyes. This world's first entertainment company was about to take its first step. Chapter 261. The dozen people here are our original team. You've been with them for a long time. If some of them are smart, you can ask them to be responsible for the newly built venues outside. Of course, it doesn't matter if they are not smart. As long as they are down to earth and willing to work, they can learn these things slowly. Li pinched a piece of osmanthus cake, put it in his mouth and told his plan to Wan Ruoqing. It's not a solution to live on rewards all the time. In a few days, number the chairs. When they watch the performance in the future, one person will have one ticket, and they will sit according to the number. You can decide the ticket price. The higher the seats are, the more expensive it will be. When all the seats are sold out, start to sell the standing tickets and the price can be lower. Wan Ruoqing listened carefully and remembered every word he said in her heart. Since ancient times, actors' income had mostly depended on others' rewards. The method of buying tickets before watching the performance had never been heard of. But this was not important. What was important was that this sentence came from his mouth, so it must not be wrong. This method is not necessarily suitable. In short, change it slowly. You know the things here better than I do. You can make your own decisions. Unconsciously, the last piece of osmanthus cake had been eaten. Li stood up, clapped his hands and said. Wan Ruoqing also stood up, bowed to him seriously and said, if this method is feasible, I don't know how many people can avoid being homeless. I thank you on behalf of those actors. The matter of recruiting actors will be handed over to you and Mr. Sunday. Li made an obeisance and said. The reason why he did this was that he also wanted to change the current situation of this industry and let those actors live a better life, but it was more because of his own selfishness. But in any case, a win-win result was always good. He was used to being a hands-off boss. After handing this matter to Wan Ruoqing, he didn't intend to take care of it anymore. She was also an actor, so she was the most suitable candidate for this matter. When he walked out of the brothel and passed by Rui Square, suddenly a figure rushed out from the side and grabbed his arm. Lord Commandant, you're finally here. Li was startled, thinking that it was someone from the Green Forest who had come to seek revenge. Just as he was about to struggle free, he heard the figure's surprised and delighted voice. From the looks of it, Xiaoqun was not here to seek revenge. Xiaoqun took a closer look and asked doubtfully, Physician Qin, what are you doing? The person in front of him was Physician Qin of Huichen Hall. After not seeing him for a long time, the old man who was previously quite spirited had actually become much more haggard. It was unknown what had happened during this period of time. He invited him into the Rui workshop and poured him a cup of green tea. After taking a sip, Dr. Qin sighed and said with a bitter tone, County Lieutenant, you really made me look for you for a long time. Why is Dr. Qin looking for me? Li looked at him in confusion. Did I owe him money? Looking at him, it seemed that he owed him a lot. Impossible. I don't remember when I borrowed money from him. Looking at the county lieutenant's confused face, the expression on Dr. Chen's face could no longer be described in words. Since the last time he saw the county lieutenant suture the wound with a needle and thread, Dr. Chen knew that this was another great achievement. He solemnly asked him to spread this method. At that time the county lieutenant also readily agreed, but after that day there was no news. Although he personally saw the county lieutenant's rescue that day, he went to see the patient. The suture was obviously not an ordinary thread, and there seemed to be some details before the suture. He still had a lot of doubts in these aspects. It was a matter of great importance, so it was impossible for him to hastily present this method. As a doctor, Dr. Qin certainly knew the importance of this method. If all the doctors in the world could learn this method, many lives would be saved. In the days when he was waiting for the county lieutenant to teach this method, he didn't know the taste of food and couldn't sleep at night. If he could also leave a small mark on this great merit, what kind of honor would it be? However, after waiting for a few days, he didn't see the county lieutenant again. Dr. Chen couldn't sit still and went to the county government office to look for him several times, but he only got the answer that the county lieutenant was not in. He went to the Rui workshop to look for him, but the door of the shop was closed and there was a big lock hanging outside. He stayed outside for several days but no one came. One night he finally saw the light in the shop, but before he got close he was put on the neck by several knives at the same time. He was almost scared to death in the middle of the night. If he didn't explain his identity to those people, his head would have been cut off. Thinking of his experience these days, and then looking at the county lieutenant's confused expression at this time, it was obvious that he had forgotten about that matter. Dr. Qin almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. Forcibly suppressing his old blood pressure, Dr. Qin stood up and respectfully bowed to Li Yi, saying, I beg you, Your Excellency, to spread the method of suturing wounds to the world. Countless people and soldiers will remember the county lieutenant's great kindness. After Dr. Qin spoke, Li Yi remembered this matter. At that time he seemed to have said that he would teach him the method of suturing wounds, but he didn't. At that time he was worried about those gangsters, so he didn't remember it later. If he hadn't suddenly mentioned it today, he probably wouldn't have remembered it for the rest of his life. They didn't need to remember his great kindness. Saving a life was better than building a 7-storied pagoda. Suturing wounds didn't require any technical content, but it could play a big role on the battlefield. If the doctors in the army could learn it, at least more than 20% of the soldiers could escape from the line of death. Gunpowder was like a devil locked in Pandora's box, a machine that harvested human lives in the cold weapon era. Li Yi was the person who released it. No one knew how many people would die in the hands of this devil in the future. Although he didn't do it himself, it could be regarded as an indirect sin. He didn't want to build an innumerable pagoda to become a Buddha, but it was good to reduce some of his sins. In order to ensure that he didn't miss any key information, Dr. Chen made full use of the truth that a good memory was inferior to a bad pen. He deliberately borrowed a pen and paper from Li Yi and wrote down all the words that Li Yi said next. After that, he also asked Li Yi to check it several times until there was no mistake. Looking at the dense page of paper, Dr. Chen finally showed a smile on his face. This piece of paper was as light as a feather, but it weighed more than 10,000 pounds in his heart. If the future generations could remember his name when they mentioned the suturing technique again, besides feeling grateful to County Magistrate Li, he wouldn't have any regrets even if he died now. County Magistrate I Chen Mufeng, dare not forget your kindness in this life. Dr. Chen's face was solemn, and he once again bowed respectfully to Li Yi. The bow just now was for the people in the world, and this bow was for himself. In this world, everyone wanted to have a chance to leave their name in history and be remembered by the future generations. Dr. Chen was naturally no exception. County Magistrate Li, who gave him this opportunity, could accept his big bow. County Magistrate, if your relatives and friends need medicine for any diseases in the future, you can come to our Huichen Hall. We won't charge a penny for the medicine. In order to show his sincerity, Dr. Chen patted his chest and said. Li looked at him. Compared with Her Royal Highness, who only exploited him and never gave him any benefits, Dr. Chen's sincerity was already very good. But why did he still have an urge to kick him? Chapter 262. Dr. Chen held the piece of paper and left as if he had found a treasure. Before he left, he told Li Yi that when he got back, he had to make a copy of what was written on it and personally hand it over to Sir Lu of the Imperial Physicians Bureau. As for the original manuscript, which was this piece of paper, he had to keep it at home and pray to it every day so that it could be passed down to future generations. It seemed that for the ancient people, money was not the most important thing. Even when they did not have enough to eat, clothes to wear, and food to eat, they still valued reputation and honor more than anything else. Scholars sharpened their brains to enter the court and become an official. Which one of them did not have ambitions to fulfill, to make a career, and to leave their name in the annals of history? Perhaps later on, they only thought about making money and wielding power, but that was a trend in a bad situation. One could not deny their original intentions. Dr. Chen put down his pride and asked him for advice on suturing wounds. He even traveled thousands of miles from Qing and Prefecture to the capital to personally hand this thing over to the hands of the imperial physician, Lu Jimin, so that all the doctors in the world could learn it. All this was just to leave a small mark in the annals of history. If someone in the future, when suturing a wound, had a 1 in a million chance of thinking of the name Chen Mufeng, he would probably laugh out loud in his coffin. His obsession was so deep that if Li Yi had said no at that time, Dr. Chen would probably have knocked his head on Li Yi's body to prove his sincerity. As he walked out of Rui's workshop, he sighed. Leaving a name in the annals of history was far more practical than a few hundred or 1,000 taels of silver. In the future, if he had a cold or diarrhea, he would not go to other medicine shops, but to Huichen Hall. Whatever he could get back was better. Li Yi held a sword in his hand and waved it in the courtyard. Every day he would take out 2 hours to practice martial arts in the courtyard. This had become his daily routine. The sword in his hand was Lu Rui's treasure. After much coaxing and pestering, he finally managed to borrow it from her. He also used 10 pieces of osmanthus cakes as a condition for her to teach him a set of swordsmanship. The osmanthus cake was given to him by Wan Ruoqing. He liked doing business without any cost the most. In 2 days he had almost mastered the basic sword art taught by Lu Rui. When he was fighting with Mississippi Lu, who only used a branch and did not use any true chi, his sword was knocked away after only 2 moves, and the branch was on his neck. The evaluation he received was that he only knew inflexible moves and did not know how to be flexible. Even if he learned a powerful sword art, it would be useless. Li Yi was also helpless about this. He didn't have much experience in fighting, and only Mississippi Lu was willing to spar with him. How much flexibility could he possibly have? He also knew where his shortcomings were. When it came to practicing martial arts, not everyone could dominate the world after learning a powerful martial art. Without enough accumulation of experience, it was like owning a treasure for nothing. The only thing missing was the key to open the door. It would be a waste not to use the free sparring partner. If he fought with Mississippi Lu more, he would become more and more powerful. Uncle Han walked over with a cloth bag in his hand and put it on the stone table. There was a rustling sound coming from the cloth bag. Uncle Han smiled and said, "Young master, the small wooden blocks are all done." "Thank you for your hard work, Uncle Han." Li Yi opened the cloth bag and saw piles of small wooden blocks inside. They already had the shape of mahjong, and the size was similar to the size of the mahjong in the future. The edges and corners were also polished very smooth so it would not hurt his hand. He counted the number and there were exactly 150 pieces. There were 136 pieces in a set of mahjong. In case one piece was broken there was a spare. Now that he had the wooden blocks, he would leave the rest to Mississippi Lu. Looking at Lu Rui who was practicing swordsmanship not far away, Li Yi carried the cloth bag and walked over. She was practicing the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Recently she seemed to have hit a bottleneck. She often raised her sword and slashed randomly. When there was nothing to do, Li Yi did not dare to talk to her. "Rui, how about we discuss something?" Seeing Li Yi walking over, Lu Rui put away the sword in his hand. He glanced at her and said impatiently, "What?" Her tone was a little irritated. These days her learning of the Tai Chi swordsmanship was smooth. 2 days ago she finally hit a bottleneck. Her progress was slow as if she was stuck in a quagmire. "Help me carve something on these wooden blocks, and I will teach you the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship." Li Yi looked at her and said temptingly, "Negotiation was also an art. First of all, one had to know what the other party needed. Then, they would be able to achieve miraculous results." Because of this matter, Mississippi Lu was like having her period for the second time in a month. Her temper was bad and even Xiao Huan was avoiding her. She could not resist the temptation and could only be a free labor in exchange for what she needed. "You know the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship?" Anger flashed across Lu Rui's face. She glared at him. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Because she had hit a bottleneck, she was thinking about how to break through even when she was eating and sleeping. Suddenly, someone told her that she knew the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship. Her first thought was not happiness but anger. This was Mississippi Lu's logic. Seeing that Mississippi Lu's gaze was starting to turn hostile, Li Yi was a little puzzled. The story should not have developed like this. Shouldn't she agree to his request and carve mahjong in exchange for the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship that he talked nonsense about? Why was she looking at him like that? Wait, why did she raise her sword? What do you want? Wait, let's talk. Put down your sword first. Don't do it. Help. After a while, Li Yi was forced to a corner by Lu Rui. Mississippi Lu probably did not know that her current position was called leaning against the wall in the future. She only looked at Li Yi with a mocking gaze. Li Yi felt that he was too naive just now. Women were unreasonable creatures. If this woman was called Lu Rui, then she could not be judged by common sense. The idea of using the essence of the Tai Chi swordsmanship that even he did not know whether it was real or fake had been proven to be impossible. Looking at Mississippi Lu's expression, she was ready to force herself on him. There was no rice at home, so Rui took Xiao Huan out to buy some. Uncle Han closed the door when he went out. There were only the two of them at home. Even if they screamed their throats out, no one would come to save them. For Taiji, the sword moves aren't important. Only by memorizing the constantly revolving sword intent and forgetting the order of the moves can one obtain its essence. When facing an enemy, one must control the sword with his will, allowing it to be ever-changing and have endless moves. Only by mastering it thoroughly can one be able to use it as one pleases. A man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. Facing Mississippi Lu's robbing behavior, Li Yi decided to compromise for now. Although he did not really understand what this sentence meant, when Zhang Sanfeng taught Zhang Wuji swordsmanship on Wudong Mountain, he made him forget the moves. Perhaps this was what it meant. It should be able to scare Mississippi Lu, right? After interacting with Rui for so long, Li Yi already knew that the more mysterious something was, the more it could scare her. As for whether or not she could learn anything from it, it would depend on her own comprehension. Sure enough, after hearing this sentence, Mississippi Lu finally let go of him. A familiar blank expression appeared on her pretty face. Li Yi let out a sigh of relief. When it came to tricking people, ordinary people could not be compared to those Taoist priests and monks. Priest Zhang was really a god and he could not catch up to him. Chapter 263. Just when Li Yi gave up on the idea of hiring Mississippi Lu for free and planned to do it himself, Lu Rui walked over with her sword in her arms. "Tell me, what did you want from me?" She looked at Li Yi with her sword in her arms. The feeling of a storm just now disappeared without a trace, and she felt a sense of lightness. Nothing much. I just want you to help me carve something on this. Li Yi pointed at the pile of small wooden blocks and said. A moment later, the long sword in Rui's hand was replaced by a sharp little dagger. Her movements were so fast that Li Yi couldn't see it clearly. Rings or long strips quickly appeared on the small blocks. After they were carved, she threw them to Li Yi. Li Yi couldn't believe it. Mississippi Lu had changed so much before and after. Did her period leave for the second time this month in such a short time? Or did she really understand the essence of Tai Chi sword from those words and successfully break through the realm? After careful observation, he found that there seemed to be some small changes in her body. In the past, she was like a sharp sword that could scare people to death with just a glance. Now, that kind of temperament had weakened a lot, and there was an additional indescribable feeling. This feeling was more or less similar to the feeling that Rui gave him. Li Yi sighed in his heart, feeling quite hurt. What kind of person was this? He just randomly made a few sentences, and she actually understood the essence of martial arts. Wasn't what she said just now nonsense in Wuxia novels? Could it be that old Master Jin, the master of Wuxia novels, was actually a peerless master who returned to the natural state? He probably wouldn't have the chance to verify the truth of this matter in this lifetime. He picked up the small wooden block that Lu Rui threw over and painted the patterns on it. The ink quickly seeped in and he put it under the sun to dry it in a short while. Winter really wasn't a good season. It was annoying to always be under the sun. Occasionally he could sit on the Kong and play mahjong to change his mood. There were 4 people in the house, just enough for a table. In a few days he would also make the poker cards. When Rui and Xiaohuan cooked, the 3 of them could also play dodiju. Thinking about it, it wasn't a bad idea. Old son, you're such a busy man. How come you have time to visit me today? In a dilapidated thatched cottage outside the prefecture city, an old man who was lying on a bed looked at the old man's surnamed son as he walked in and said with a smile. I came to see if you're dead or not, old son said without hesitation. Don't worry. I have to see if you're dead before I can close my eyes. They were old friends who often joked about such things. The old man lying on the bed with a somewhat dispirited complexion did not get angry. Instead, he retorted sarcastically. Old man's son placed a pile of things in a corner. Immediately, a young man came over with a porcelain bowl and respectfully said, Grandpa son, drink some water. You've accepted a good disciple. Old man's son rubbed the young man's head and said with a smile. Knowing that his master and grandpa's son had something to say, the young man put down the bowl and left. Speaking of the young man in front of him, the old man lying on the bed relaxed his eyebrows. The old man on the bed looked at old man's son and said, Let's get straight to the point. I don't have many years left to live. I heard that your farm has a steady stream of customers these days, and you've turned a dead farm into a farm. I admire your ability and I've never asked you for anything in my life. I just hope that after I die you can give this child something to eat. The child is still young and he can't live alone. As long as he doesn't starve to death, you can do whatever you want with him. No, that won't do. Old son shook his head before he finished listening. A trace of anger appeared on the old man's face and he said, Old son, this child's talent is not bad. If you train him for a few years he will be able to earn money for you. We've known each other for a lifetime, and you're not even willing to help me with this? Old son shook his head and said, Don't be in such a hurry to die. You should teach your disciple yourself. When I came here, I already sent little Yun to find a doctor. When the time comes, I'll ask the doctor to write a prescription and have your disciple boil it for you twice a day. I reckon that he will recover very quickly. When the time comes, I still need your help. This old man has so much talent, it would be a pity if he died. The old man on the bed listened with a blank face. Old son said a lot, but he became more and more confused. If you have something to say, just say it. Stop your storytelling. The old man's muddy eyes stared at old son and said. Old son patted his shoulder and said with a smile, Good thing, very good thing. The youth squatting outside the door used a wooden stick to tease the ants on the ground. There were not many ants in winter. Maybe it was because the weather was good today, but there were a few ants moving around under the eaves. The youth kept drawing circles with the wooden stick and watched the ants move back and forth in the circle. From time to time he would look back into the house. He didn't know what Grandpa, son and master were talking about. Every once in a while there would be a few sounds of laughter. Grandpa, son seemed to be very happy and Grandpa was also very happy. Why didn't little Yun come with Grandpa, son today? She even said that she would go to the mountains with him to set a trap to catch rabbits in a few days. As the young man thought about this, He raised his head and saw a young man who looked about the same age as him walking over with another figure. 80,000. Li Yi sat cross-legged on the warm brick bed and took a tile from the small table. He rubbed it with his thumb for a while, but he couldn't figure out what it was. He took a peek, shook his head, and threw the tile in his hand out. Looking at the messy tiles in front of him, his expression was quite gloomy. Lady Luck obviously didn't favor him today. After teaching Rui and the others how to play mahjong, he didn't win even once after a few rounds. He lost 5 taels of silver. 70,000. Rui's expression was even more gloomy than Li Yi's. She lost 10 taels of silver. Rui smiled and played a tile. This thing called mahjong that her husband made was quite fun. She had already won 5 taels of silver. 9 circles. Xiao Huan's eyes were curved into crescent moons. Second Mrs. 10 taels of silver were all won by her. When it was Li Yi's turn to play, he clearly felt his thigh being pinched by someone. He looked down and saw that Mississippi Lu was making a gesture to him. She stretched out 2 fingers on one hand and made a circle with her index finger and thumb on the other. This was what 2 circles meant. Li Yi glanced at her. Playing mahjong was all about fairness and she actually wanted to cheat. However, when he thought about it, if Mississippi Lu continued to lose, someone might suffer. For the sake of family harmony and world peace, he had no choice but to disassemble his tile and play at 2 circles. Rui couldn't wait to pick up Li Yi's tile. She was very satisfied with his tactfulness. With this 2 circles she could listen to the tiles. His little trick just now might not be able to fool her sister, but it was not a problem to trick Xiao Huan. The little maid was too lucky today. He had to suppress her arrogance first. Get rich. He casually played a tile. Whoosh. Xiao Huan stretched out her white and tender little hand and pushed down her tile wall. Her dimples were revealed as she smiled. 13 circles. Young master, miss, I won again. Chapter 264. Recently, Li Yi and Lu Rui had become closer because they had never won a game of mahjong with only the 2 of them in the house. Mahjong was originally created to relieve their boredom, but the more they played, the more depressed they became. It was not a big deal to lose money, but they had to regain their dignity. Mississippi Lu was more competitive than him, and she would not allow herself to lose to others in any aspect. So recently the game at home had not stopped. Then the 2 of them lost more and more. Li Yi finally understood what was going on in a gambler's mind. It was no wonder that so many people had lost everything because of gambling since ancient times. This was a road of no return. He thought he had the home advantage. Rui and the others had just started playing mahjong, and it would take them a long time to familiarize themselves with the game. However, the goddess of fortune only cared about Xiao Huan and Rui. He and Mississippi Lu had never received the goddess's blessing. It was indeed a must-kill weapon for middle-aged and elderly women. Within 2 days, a second set of mahjong appeared in the house. After dinner, the women who were idle at home played mahjong for the whole afternoon. Old Fong and the others were busy renovating the stoves for each family. After Mrs. Fong came to the kitchen to take a look, she no longer mentioned the matter of Old Fong smashing the stoves. She played mahjong with a few other women and estimated that they would be able to have dinner the next day. After cooking, the Kong was warm and comfortable. This glutton finally did something reliable. When Li Yi came back from outside, he saw a few women in front of the house from afar. The sounds of eating and banging were incessant. 2 elderly women shook their heads and sighed at the degeneration of morals in the world. How did the originally diligent wives suddenly become lazy women? The children waved their arms and cried out that they were hungry, but the mothers only cared about grabbing the wooden blocks. When the children cried out that they were hungry, the mothers threw a few copper coins to the children to buy food. In the past, such women would have been driven back to their parents' homes. Living in this world was not just for food and clothing, but also for entertainment. The emergence of mahjong had undoubtedly opened the door to a new world for the women in the stronghold. They had found spiritual sustenance. As for whether or not they would become addicted to it, they did not have to worry too much. It was just for the novelty of playing mahjong for a few days. After the novelty wore off, mahjong could only be reduced to an ornament in daily life. People who were used to living a hard life would not be idle all the time. For example, Old Man Sun had become busier and busier recently. Li Yi had just returned from the brothel. While Old Man Sun was not around, he and Ruoqing spent a long time talking about recruiting performers and expanding their business. A medium-sized brothel had been rebuilt outside the city. According to Li Yi, it was more appropriate to call it a theater. Building such a thing was different from building a house. It was the same as building a shack. The place that had been built in a few days was sturdy, far better than other crudely built brothels. It would definitely not collapse under the weight of heavy snow again. As for actors, since this model was still in the experimental stage, they had only recruited 20 of them for the time being. Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing had discussed it and decided that a medium-sized theater should have 20 actors. It would not only satisfy the performance requirements, but it would also be easier to manage. Living at the bottom of society, it was common for them to not have enough to eat. No one could refuse a fixed monthly salary of 500 copper coins. At first, those performers thought that Oldman's son was lying to them. After a short moment of shock, they seemed to be afraid that Oldman's son would change his mind, so they immediately pressed their fingerprints on the contract. In addition to the salary, the content of the contract also required them not to spread what they learned here. Everyone understood this. For people like them, this was something to eat. If others learned it, they would be the ones starving to death. No one dared to violate the contract. Even if this was brought to the government, it would count. It was definitely a place that they could not afford to offend. Stage plays were still very unfamiliar to those newly recruited performers. After listening to Li Yi's suggestion, Oldman's son and the others pondered for a long time before they came up with it. These people had no experience, so they still needed to go through some training before they could officially take up the job. Although the painted skin was still popular, it was obviously not as popular as before. The next one to be put on the big stage would be a Chinese ghost story. Unlike the former, which relied on horror to attract people, stories like romance and the female ghost scholar would probably be more attractive to men in this era. This was especially true for scholars. Every single one of them had fantasized about various romantic affairs, such as spending the spring night with a fox immortal or a beautiful female ghost. 80% of the supernatural novels on the market had such a plot, and it was still the mainstream of the market. It was a group of ancient losers who liked to fantasize. If their fantasies were fulfilled, they would not be afraid of not generously, "Oh right, I still have to find time to copy a few more stories. Why don't I take out the complete Liao Zhai novel and make it into a series?" Li Yi lay comfortably in the huge bathtub. Actually, the ancient people also knew how to enjoy themselves. If the bathtub was covered with a lid, could it be called a sauna? In the middle of winter, there was nothing more comfortable than soaking in a warm room with a hot bath. If there was, then there would be a pair of soft hands constantly massaging your shoulders while you were soaking in the bath. The tiredness of the day would be dispelled. Xiao Huan's massage skills were becoming more and more skillful. Li Yi secretly condemned this kind of luxurious and decadent life in his heart. He was incomparably disgusted with feudal hedonism. He opened his eyes and glanced at the door through the mist. Xiao Huan had gone out to get hot water. Why wasn't she back yet? Creak. The door was pushed open and he could vaguely see a figure carrying a bucket of water in. Li Yi closed his eyes in satisfaction. Footsteps came from behind him. Warm water was poured into the bathtub. Just as the servant girl was about to leave, Li Yi called out to her without opening his eyes. "Wait a moment, help massage the young master's shoulders again." The footsteps paused, and a moment later, a pair of soft hands were placed on his shoulders. He felt that Xiao Huan's skills this time had improved quite a bit. He remembered that when he was shopping previously, the servant girl stared at a bracelet in golden jade lane for a long time. He would buy it for her tomorrow. As he massaged, Li Yi began to feel strange. No matter how fast the servant girl's skills in massaging the shoulders improved, it was impossible for her to reach Rui's level in less than a quarter of an hour. Moreover, the familiar chatter by his ear was gone, and there was no longer any pleading for him to continue telling her the story that she had not finished. Just when he was about to turn his head to take a look, a familiar voice sounded. "Husband, the water seems to be a little cold. Do you want to add some hot water?" This was Rui's voice. Chapter 265. Ordering Rui around was not as easy as ordering Xiao Huan around. He did not add more hot water, nor did he let Rui continue to massage his shoulders. After she went out, he came out of the bathtub, dried his body, lay on the bed with his arms as a pillow, and stared at the ceiling in a daze. Before going to bed, he would habitually think about some things. Even the memory fragments hidden in the depths of his mind in his previous life were found in a corner, carefully savoring and never tired of it. One by one, the happy, sad, or angry things were like fleeting clouds. Although it had only been a few months, it seemed to have crossed thousands of years. Those things, whether happy or sad, did not cause much ripples in his heart. He just tried his best not to think of those familiar faces. Every time this happened, an emotion called yearning would spread like crazy. Those people or things he was destined to be unable to give up in this life. If there was a chance to go back, no matter how difficult it was, he would not have any hesitation, even if it was just a glance, and then look at that familiar world. Pa! A crisp sound rang in the room, but Li Yi, who was in a state of absent-mindedness, did not notice it. Today was the 15th, and the moon outside was very round. This day of every month was the most difficult time for Li Yi, especially when he was alone. There was no sound around, and a feeling of loneliness escaped from the depths of his soul. However, even in a state of absent-mindedness, the feeling of dizziness could still be felt, and the strength in his body was gradually draining away. The feeling of nausea also gradually became clearer. Naturally, it was impossible for him to feel dizzy and nauseous because of homesickness. When he realized that the situation was not quite right, he immediately recovered his mind and sat up from the bed. At this time the room was filled with a strange smell. Li Yi was very familiar with this smell, the smell of coal smoke that he often smelled when he was a child. Not knowing when, the chimney made of bamboo on the honeycomb briquette stove actually cracked. The symptoms that he felt just now were obviously mild carbon monoxide poisoning. The chimney made of bamboo couldn't completely expel the smoke, so people who had a stove would usually choose to extinguish the stove at night. After taking a bath just now, he forgot to do so. Fortunately, he didn't fall asleep. Otherwise, Ru Yi and the others would have to wait to collect his corpse tomorrow morning. With a lingering fear in his heart, he moved the stove outside and opened the door and windows to the fullest. He sat alone on the porch and looked at the moon. She did not know when the carbon monoxide in the room would run out. The moon tonight was big and round. It was said that the moon on the 15th of the lunar month was round on the 16th of the lunar month, but the round in the word circumference was not the round in the word reunion. Wearing an unlined garment, it was quite cold sitting on the porch. However, Li did not want to move now, so he did not go back to the room to get his clothes. He just leaned against a pillar and looked up at the sky. He did not know whether the moon in the two worlds was the same, at least on the surface. There was no difference. There was a large dark spot alternating between light and dark. Now, the common saying was that the moonlight was blocked by the osmanthus tree in the moon palace, and almost everyone thought so. Every time this happened, he would involuntarily have a feeling of loneliness as a master. A group of ignorant people. It was just a plane on the moon. There was no osmanthus tree. Last time, when Li Xian was drunk, he said he wanted to go to the moon to see Chang'e. With the current conditions, he could not think about going to the moon, which was even more difficult than reaching the sky. A figure had been leaning against the door for a long time, watching Li Yi's expression alternating between joy and sadness. His eyes had never left the moon in the sky, and he was holding a garment in his hand, but he never walked over. Achoo! He sneezed and almost snot came out of his nose. When he was about to get up and go to the room to get his clothes, he felt a weight on his shoulder, and a coat immediately appeared on his body. "Husband, are you admiring the moon alone?" Lu Rui sat down beside Li Yi, also staring at the moon in the sky. "I'm thinking, when can I go to the moon to have a look?" Li Yi seemed to murmur unconsciously. "Ah." There was a little surprise in Rui's voice. She looked back at him, blinking her eyes. She had always been steady, but at this moment she actually looked like a little girl. She reached out and touched Li Yi's forehead. After finding that he did not have a fever, she became even more confused. The Moon Palace was the place where immortals lived. How could mortals go up there? Since ancient times, countless people had thought about it, but no one had done it. Although the moon always hung there quietly, there was no door. Only immortals could go up there. Don't be surprised. In theory, this is very feasible. Li Yi took her hand away from his forehead and found that it was very cold. He held it with both hands and said, "Maybe thousands of years later, someone will really do it. However, if an ordinary person goes up there, they will definitely die. It's hot in the day and cold at night. There are holes made by big stones everywhere. It's not a place for people to stay at all. If they don't die from the cold or the heat, it will be fun. If they don't die from the cold or heat, then it'll be fun. Everyone there is an expert in Qigong. With a leap, they can cover at least a distance of several feet. Their strength is also extremely great. An ordinary person can lift the stone lion at the entrance with just a little effort." Lu Rui let Li Yi hold her hand and transfer his warmth to her. She listened to him talk about these incredible things and would occasionally ask a few questions. He was always so knowledgeable. He knew a lot of things that she had never heard before. In the past, she thought that people who were educated were all so amazing. Later, she gradually realized that her husband was different from those scholars. No scholar could tell so many wonderful stories, and no scholar knew so many ways to earn money. Furthermore, no scholar knew that Chang'e was not on the moon. Her husband even knew how far the moon was from here. If there was a road that could go straight to the moon, an ordinary person would have to walk for 10 years to get there. If it was someone else, they would definitely think that the person who said these things was crazy. However, she knew that her husband never lied about these things. Achoo. He couldn't continue gossiping about the moon with Rui. Li Yi had already sneezed a few times. It was winter and it was still cold to sit outside with clothes on. His butt was almost frozen to the point of losing consciousness when he sat on the cold ground. Seeing Li Yi stand up, Lu Rui walked into his room and quickly came out. She shook her head and said, "I can't go in yet. The carbon poison has not dissipated completely." When she went to Li Yi's room to get his clothes, she already felt that something was wrong. Seeing him put the stove outside, how could she not know what had happened? Forget it. I'll sleep in the kitchen tonight. It was really too cold. Li Yi really missed the hot Kong bed. Lu Rui shook her head and said, "Xiao Huan is afraid of the cold. I've already let her sleep in the kitchen. I'm afraid she's already asleep." Li Yi wrapped his clothes around his body. Originally he had one room, Rui had another, and Xiao Huan usually slept with Rui. Now that he couldn't sleep in his room at night, and Xiao Huan had taken over the warm Kong bed in the kitchen, did he have to sleep outside tonight? "Why don't you sleep in this concubine's room tonight?" Hearing Rui's voice, Li Yi's expression froze. Chapter 266. Why don't you sleep in this concubine's room tonight? Hearing Rui's words, Li Yi's first thought was that it was her trick again. Last time, she closed the door and asked him to take off his clothes, but he didn't expect it to be for healing. This time it must not be what he thought at first. Although he had the soul of thousands of years later and was much more open-minded than the ancient people, in fact he was still very thin-skinned on some things. After all, he was just a young man without any experience in love in his previous life. It was too difficult to expect him to be an expert in flirting with girls, especially beautiful girls in ancient times. He walked into Rui's room generously. He would sleep here for the night. Rui, Xiao Huan, or Rui could make do for one night. In the future he would have to put out the stove early at night and Fang would have to warn him. Carbon monoxide poisoning was almost incurable in ancient times. Even if he could be cured after a long time, there would be serious sequelae. He would either be paralyzed or stupid, and he needed to be vigilant at all times. There was a faint fragrance on the sheets and quilt, which Li Yi would never forget in his life. When he first came to Willow Leaf Village, he woke up in this fragrance. It was not perfume but the natural body fragrance of a woman. Rui carried a quilt from the next room and closed the door. Under Li Yi's puzzled gaze, she walked to the bed and said, "Husband, can you move a little deeper?" Carbon monoxide poisoning and Fang were all forgotten by Li Yi at the moment. If she liked to inhale, she could inhale. She had a good body, so inhaling some carbon monoxide was nothing. Hugging the quilt with a faint fragrance, he shrank to the foot of the bed. Watching Rui crawling into the quilt and lying next to him, Li Yi was still in a daze. It turned out that he was right this time. Xiao Huan and Rui are asleep and I don't want to disturb them. She turned to look at Li Yi and explained, "It's getting late. Husband, you should rest early." If Li Yi had not fallen into a state of shock, he would have been able to hear the slight tremble in her voice. Unfortunately, he was still unable to get over the soft flesh on his arm. He pinched it hard and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The pain meant that he wasn't dreaming, nor was it a hallucination caused by inhaling too much carbon monoxide. In the middle of the room, the flame of the oil lamp on the table was still flickering. Rui flicked her finger and a strong wind swept across, plunging the room into darkness. Although he was only covered with a blanket, Li did not feel cold at all. Instead, his body felt warm from the inside out. His nose was filled with a familiar fragrance. He had always been used to sleeping alone. Now that there was another person by his side, the sleepiness that had just arisen was instantly gone. However, none of this was important. His heartbeat quickened and his mind was filled with all kinds of guesses. What did she mean? Was it what he thought? If he pounced on her now, would he be beaten to death by her? The good tacit understanding between the two was finally broken tonight. Li Yi, who was almost an idiot when it came to relationships, couldn't guess what she was thinking. There was a fierce battle in his heart. Should he be a beast or worse than a beast? This was a question worth thinking about. Li Yi felt that he was starting to be like a philosopher again. In the darkness, where Li Yi couldn't see, Lu Rui's pretty face blushed from her neck to her ears. She could hear that Li Yi's heartbeat was much faster than before. In fact, as a martial arts master, she couldn't control her heartbeat at this moment. It wasn't easy to make this decision. She pondered for a long time before she plucked up the courage to say it. Husband and wife, they had to sleep together eventually. Although they weren't used to it now, there would be a day when they would get used to it. Aunt Fang had already asked several times why there was no movement in her stomach after being married for almost half a year. She asked if she should find a doctor to take a look. She was already so old that her child could run around. Listening to Aunt Fang's private words with a red face, she still blushed when she thought about it. When she thought about those things she would do with her husband in the future, she could no longer maintain her calm state of mind. Although she was very skilled in martial arts, she was still a woman from an ordinary family. She had practiced martial arts hard since she was young. It was only because after she became stronger that no one could bully the two of them. Now she didn't have to worry about being bullied. She had also reached a level that others couldn't reach in their lifetime in martial arts. Instead, she liked such a peaceful life. In her heart, she also hoped to be able to live like a normal husband and wife as soon as possible. The prerequisite was to break the silent tacit understanding between the two of them. No matter what, someone had to take the first step. If that person wasn't her husband, then it could only be herself. She stretched her hands out of the quilt and folded them in front of her chest. Her eyes were wide open. She felt an extra breath beside her. It was already very late at night, but she still didn't feel sleepy at all. When a hand reached out from the side, her heart couldn't help but start to beat wildly. She almost ran away, but in the end, that hand only held her hand and didn't move further. Even Li Yi could feel that Rui's breathing had become hurried, which meant that her heart was not calm at this time. After feeling her mood, his heart calmed down. Sleep. Their fingers were tightly interlocked. Li Yi closed his eyes and quickly entered a dream. The breathing beside him quickly calmed down, and Lu Rui let out a long sigh of relief. She tilted her head slightly to take a look, and an imperceptible smile appeared on her pretty face. She slowly closed her eyes. Li Yi had another dream at night. This time there were no messy things in the dream. Naturally, he didn't have to wash his underwear secretly in the morning. In the dream he was in his home in the 21st century, sitting on the sofa and watching TV. Rui, who was wearing a white dress, was busy in the kitchen. The doorbell rang. Li got up and opened the door. When he opened the door, a long sword was on his neck. Opposite him was Mississippi Lu, who was dressed up and glaring at him. At the end of the dream, he was still being chased by Mississippi Lu with a sword. Li didn't understand why Rui always liked to run into his dream. This time the reason for the chase was that he kidnapped her sister. Early in the morning he got up from the bed. Although there was no one beside him, the fragrance was still there, which meant that everything last night was not a dream. Last night he had crossed a huge chasm. There was a relaxed smile on the corner of his mouth. The carbon poison was really too annoying. Li Yi felt that his previous room couldn't be used anymore. Coincidentally, there was not enough space in the storage room at home. From now on he would use it as a storage room. As for the original storage room, it was not bad to modify it into a study. Xiao Huan walked out of Li Yi's room with a copper basin in her hand. She looked puzzled. When she was about to ask Miss where the son-in-law went early in the morning, she walked to the door of Mrs. room and looked inside. The copper basin in her hand fell to the ground with a clang. Chapter 267. I'm sorry I won. Rui played a tile. Li smiled and pushed down his tile wall. Rui jumped off the heated bed in annoyance. She glared at the two and said, "You two are in cahoots. I'm not playing anymore." Ever since Rui became Li Yi's mistress, Li Yi's luck came back. He kept gesturing secretly and Rui always understood his meaning. Thus, Mississippi Lu became the only one who lost money in the family. Although winning money was not the main point in the end. At most, she used a few copper coins to deal with it. However, there were wins and losses in playing mahjong. It was not a good thing to always lose. Mississippi Lu was obviously angry. She was probably going to take her sword to the courtyard to chop the air. If there was a god of mahjong, Xiao Huan must be her biological daughter. It was just that recently she was obviously absent-minded. She was not focused when playing mahjong. No one knew what she was thinking. The next day, Li Yi changed his room into a storage room. The reason was that the room that had been ravaged by carbon poison could not be lived in. He began to live together with Xiao Huan with a peace of mind. Although he had to choose between being a beast and being worse than a beast, he had no choice but to choose the latter. But compared to the past, this was already a groundbreaking event. The reason why Xiao Huan was a little unhappy might be that she could no longer hug Rui to sleep. She had to sleep on the heated bed in the kitchen for a long time. But it did not matter. When spring came, he would build her another room. It was not a good idea for a girl to always sleep in the kitchen. Of course, the position that should have belonged to her was occupied by him. The little servant girl felt wronged first. He would slowly make it up to her later. He took Xiao Huan to buy the hairpin that she had liked for a long time. She would no longer have a depressed expression on her face. The two people walking in front were chatting. They were talking about the new play in the Chongping Street Theater. It was called A Chinese Ghost Story. The former brothel was no longer called a brothel. It was called a theater. Although most people were not used to it, the name was not the point. The point was that the plays performed in it were more novel and special. It was not comparable to any straw shed in the courtyard. He hoped that this A Chinese Ghost Story would be better than the previous Painted Skin. Of course, special places always had special rules. It was said that the theater was different from ordinary brothels. Not everyone could enter just because they wanted to. They had to buy a so-called ticket at the door. Although it was called a ticket, it was actually a small wooden plaque. On it was written the plays that could be watched with the wooden plaque, as well as the amount of time that could be spent inside. When they left, they had to return the wooden plaque. The tickets weren't expensive, only a few copper coins were enough. It wasn't even as much as the tips they threw out at once. Someone cursed inwardly. Those actors were crazy for money. Had they never seen a brothel that took the initiative to accept money? You want money, right? I won't look anymore, okay? Many people were very satisfied with this. They felt that the idea of the theater was really wonderful. The appearance of the tickets was to keep those who had no money outside. The last time they went to watch a play, there were actually beggars sitting next to them. They were dirty and smelly. There was only so much space in the theater. If they were late, there wouldn't even be a place to stand. Now it was better. Those who only wanted to join in the fun and were unwilling to pay for tips could not enter. They were happy to be at peace. They sat leisurely with a pot of tea and a stack of broad beans. After watching the plays they liked, they would leave. It was extremely comfortable. Of course, when a new play was released, they had to be more agile. Who would care about a few copper coins for the people who lived in the prefectural city? If they were late, they could only stand. Thank you, son-in-law. With a newly bought hairpin in her hair, Xiao Huan's eyes turned into crescent moons again. In one hand she held a tanghulu. It was a gift from Aunt Sue when she met her on the street. In the other hand she held on to Li Yi's arm. She took a bite and leaned over to give a bite to Li Yi. She took a bite. The tanghulu in the winter didn't melt so easily. The taste was improved. Those women had been trying to make more delicious tanghulu. Now they had developed several different styles. After eating the tanghulu, the young maidservant looked up at Li Yi and said expectantly, "Son-in-law, let's go to the theater to watch a play, okay?" Just now, she heard the two people in front of her talk about a Chinese ghost of Qiannu. The son-in-law had told her this story. After hearing so many ghost stories, she was no longer afraid. The last time the son-in-law brought her to see the Painted Skin stage play, she only screamed when the ferocious-looking female ghost came out. The son-in-law said that a Chinese ghost of Qiannu was not that scary, so the young maidservant felt that it was okay for her to go and take a look. He did not reject Xiao Huan's request. Today he had brought her out for a stroll. She grew up in the village and did not come into contact with many people. The young maidservant maintained her innocent and lively temperament very well. With her chattering by her side, any worries would be swept away. A small room was built at the entrance of the brothel. It was only big enough for one person. A dozen people lined up and passed by the small room. After placing a few copper coins inside, a wooden plate would be handed out from the inside. As one of the major shareholders of the theater, of course, Li Yi did not need to buy a ticket. He held Xiao Huan's hand and walked directly through the entrance. The people in the line originally wanted to question him, but when they saw the young man at the entrance politely salute the young man, they swallowed their words and obediently lined up to buy the ticket. After walking through the entrance, they faced the stage directly. The expanded stage was more than twice the size of the previous one. The seats below were also increased. There were separate stalls on both sides. Spending a few copper coins, one could buy a plate of broad beans and a pot of tea. There were 3 flavors of broad beans and one could choose freely. Of course, other than broad beans, there were also many pastries. When watching a play, eating some snacks and drinking a cup of tea would immediately improve one's taste by a lot compared to those who only knew how to shout. The price of the seats in the theater was not the same. The closer one was to the stage, the clearer one could see and the higher the price. Therefore, most of the time there would be empty seats in the first row. Some people would feel that there was not much difference between the front and back. It was really not worth it to spend a few copper coins for a seat in the front. The curtain on the stage had not been opened yet. One could see many figures behind the curtain. They were probably still making preparations. People were still lining up to enter the theater. There were not many people in the seats. He pulled Xiao Huan to sit in the middle of the first row and waited patiently. He glanced at the wooden plate in the hands of the person beside him. On it were the words "painted skin," indicating that the next performance was still painted skin. Senior Pu Songling was indeed a master of his generation. There was a performance of painted skin here, indicating that this play was quite popular. He turned his head and looked around. He realized that from the previous brothel to the current theater, too much had changed in just a few days. Chapter 268. The theater worker banged a gong, indicating that the performance was about to begin. At this time the theater was almost full. In the past, there had only been a few square tables in the brothel for people to sit around casually. Now it had been changed to chairs connected together. A small platform protruded from one side of the chairs for tea and food. Of course, only the first 2 rows had this kind of treatment. They had to let those people know where the extra copper coins they spent went. Xiao Huan wanted to see a Chinese ghost story, but she didn't make it. She could only watch the painted skin again. Since she had nothing to do, she might as well wait with her. When the curtains were pulled back, a few more figures sat next to Xiao Huan. Li only glanced at them casually. He had just turned his head when he turned back. His expression was slightly dazed. Sitting next to Xiao Huan was a man about 40 years old. His appearance was not unfamiliar to Li Yi. Professor Feng, as Magistrate Dong's god-level lackey, usually wherever he was, Magistrate Dong would appear unless something unexpected happened. Li Yi looked over and saw the magistrate sitting next to him. He felt strange. Did the magistrate and the prefectural school professor have nothing to do all day? This was not a place high officials and nobles would come. One of them was in charge of the affairs of the prefecture, and the other was in charge of education. Logically speaking, they should be very busy. Why did they have the time to come here to watch a show? Clearly, Professor Feng also saw Li Yi. After a pause, he turned his head and whispered a few words in Magistrate Dong's ear. Magistrate Dong had a deep impression of Li Yi. His few poems had surpassed all the students in Qing and Fu. He had a close relationship with Crown Prince Ning and Princess Yongla. However, his personality was a bit strange. He was extremely talented but didn't want to be an official. It was said that he had been made a county officer by the emperor, but he almost never went to the county yamen. The strange thing was, the security of the prefectural city was better than before. In all honesty, Magistrate Dong admired Li Yi very much. Especially that poem, wanting to speak but not wanting to speak, yet saying that the sky is cold in autumn, won him a deep liking. But he clearly had deep connections with the royal family. Although he wanted to promote him, it was not appropriate for him to do so. She had already forgotten about him, but she didn't expect to bump into him here today. Magistrate Dong shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. Today he just wanted to see the famous painted skin. He turned his head and said to another man in embroidered robes, "I'm curious what's so special about this painted skin that Brother Yen praised it so much." The man in embroidered clothes smiled and said, "I didn't expect that there would be no lack of capable people in this small brothel. Hidden in these short and strange stories is a profound truth. Under Brother Dong's rule, there are indeed many capable people. Before I left, His Majesty had already decided to implement the disciple rules in our Jing Kingdom as a book for children to learn. Brother Dong's contribution to the education of our Jing Kingdom cannot go unnoticed." Accepting the compliment of the man in embroidered clothes calmly, Magistrate Dong couldn't help but turn his head and look at the young man 2 seats away from him. Li Yi didn't want to flirt with a man, not to mention the other was the magistrate, even if it was the emperor. He didn't even think about immediately going up to greet the magistrate. These important people liked to go out incognito. If he put on an appearance of greeting a superior, the magistrate might even blame him for ruining his low profile. Wan Ruoqing ran the brothel very well. There was no other brothel in the city that was cleaner, tidier, and more orderly than this one. Every performance would be slightly improved. The performers relied on their acting skills, not their bodies. They were completely incomparable to those coquettish prostitutes outside. If this place couldn't keep customers, where else could? Inspired by himself, Oldman's son was ready to open a special martial arts show, but he was still in the stage of collecting information. After the incident with the Wuxia swordplay, Oldman's son keenly discovered the business opportunity. In the brothel outside the city, such stories seemed to be more popular. Moreover, the martial arts people were generous and would never be short of money. Sometimes they would even throw large silver ingots on the stage. Oldman's son had to seize this opportunity. They gave him a good suggestion. He could collect some strange stories in the martial arts world and ask around. Using the information he collected, he could rank the martial arts masters and revise the rankings according to the latest information. He heard that there was a man named Officer Zhao in Chuzhou City. Although he had always been known for his loyalty, he was actually a rare martial arts master. It was said that he was about to step into the Grandmaster realm. Ordinary people didn't even know this secret. Li didn't pay attention to the performance on the stage. He was lost in his thoughts. If such a theater could be opened all over the Jing kingdom, it would be a powerful force. Moreover, such a force would not easily attract the attention of others. If he could live such a peaceful life, he would consider it as contributing to the entertainment industry of this world. If there were always people who wanted to step on him, he was afraid that their feet would be pierced by nails. Stupid people, they think of ghosts as beauties. They don't listen to the words of loyalty. They are greedy for beauty. They don't know that a wife who has gone through hardships will gladly swallow the saliva of others. I don't know how many stupid people in the world don't know how to wake up. How sad. When thinking, the most annoying thing was to be interrupted, especially when the man in the brocade robe suddenly stood up and said these words with a laugh. To be able to see such emotions from watching a play, this fellow must have been educated before, and he must have been tormented by the path of sages. Even Li Yi was not satisfied, let alone the other people in the theater. Just when they were enjoying the show, someone suddenly stood up and shouted. Especially when the guy was sitting in the front row, everyone's view was blocked. What are you shouting for? Hurry up and sit down. They were all commoners. How could they know that the person sitting next to the man was the prefectural magistrate? They only knew that this guy had disturbed their interest in watching the show. Perhaps some people were frightened by his sudden shout, so they all spoke up in dissatisfaction. Magistrate Dong smiled bitterly. After so many years, his good friend still hadn't changed his bad habit. Thump. Among the noise there was a dull sound that was especially clear. A young man who looked like a scholar, who was sitting behind the man in the brocade robe, knelt in front of the man in the brocade robe. After bowing respectfully, he stood up and said, "Thank you for your teachings, sir. My poor wife who has gone through hardships with me for more than 10 years has suffered. Now, for the sake of a fox outside, I actually want to divorce her. How am I different from Wang Sheng?" Sir's words just now were like thunder in my ears. They were deafening. I will remember them for the rest of my life and never dare to forget them. After the scholarly young man finished speaking, he once again bowed to the man in the brocade robe and strode away without looking back. Li Yi stared blankly at the young man's back as he walked away. He was very confused. Where did they find this actor? It's not too late to mend one's ways. The man in the brocade robe also watched the young man leave with a smile on his face. He stroked his beard, displaying the demeanor of an expert. "I'm talking to you, sit down." If it wasn't for a shoe flying from behind and accurately hitting his face, he might have been able to maintain the demeanor of an expert for a while longer. Chapter 269. Magistrate Dong was shocked to see a large shoe print appear on the face of his good friend from the capital. Official Yen. Professor Feng's little heart couldn't help but beat wildly. How dare they throw a shoe at an official from the capital? These unruly people were simply too lawless. How dare you? Who threw the shoe? A few people around the man in embroidered robes had already stood up and turned to glare at the crowd. What did he say? Is he in the right to disturb the show? Chase them out. The guards of the man in embroidered robes were angry, but the audience was even angrier. It was already kind of them not to be thrown out for making a racket in the theater, but they dared to yell at everyone. They couldn't even watch the show. Weren't the few copper coins spent in vain? In the next moment, the guards were drowned in shoes flying from behind. People had thrown out quite a few people like this who didn't know what was good for them. Every show there would be one or two unlucky ones. This had even become a tradition in the theater. The smelly shoes flew through the air. Magistrate Dong and the other two were also affected. Of course they couldn't stay here any longer. They ran outside pathetically and finally let out a sigh of relief. A group of unruly people, this is too much. Professor Feng's face was hit by the sole of a shoe. His face was red and he stomped his feet outside. The man in embroidered robes used his sleeve to wipe his face. He wasn't angry. He shook his head and said, "This is a quiet place to watch the show. It is our fault for making a racket and disturbing others. It is not wrong of us to be thrown out." He turned his head to look at Magistrate Dong and said with a smile, "Under Brother Dong's rule, the people are very tough. Compared to the sorry state of Professor Feng and the man in embroidered robes, Professor Dong looked much better. The shoe had not been thrown on him and his clothes were very clean." He patted his robes and said, "The one who made a racket was you. Of course it is not wrong of you to be thrown out. We are the ones who have suffered an undeserved disaster." No matter. The man in embroidered robes waved his hand and said, "My words just now have caused Brother Dong's students to repent. Brother Dong, shouldn't you treat me to a banquet to express your gratitude?" "Oh right, Professor Feng, where is the best restaurant in Qing'an Prefecture? With my meager salary, I can't afford to go to the Drunken Fragrance restaurant." Magistrate Dong smiled and said, "There is a cup of green tea. It is a bit shabby but it is enough to serve guests. I haven't seen you for a few years, but your stinginess hasn't changed at all, Dong Wenyan." The man in embroidered robes shook his head and sighed. When Li Yi walked out, Magistrate Dong and the others were still standing outside. Xiao Huan wanted to watch the next scene of a Chinese ghost story. She asked a performer to take care of her and walked out alone. Prefectural Magistrate Dong was a boss-level official in Qing'an Fu. Since he had met him as the county magistrate, he naturally had to come up and greet him. The current Li Yi no longer considered the position of county lieutenant to be a troublesome matter. A minor rank 8 official position could eliminate most of the troubles in life. The naive thoughts of the past were long gone. This lowly official greets Prefectural Magistrate. He slowly walked in front of Prefectural Magistrate Dong and cupped his hands in salute. Li Yi had a good impression of Prefectural Magistrate Dong. This Prefectural Magistrate had a good reputation. Last time in the Wangfu he had even helped him out of trouble. Prefectural Magistrate Dong looked at him and asked, "County Magistrate Li is not on duty in the Yamen. Why are you here?" Li Yi coughed lightly and said, "A few days ago I was injured by a scoundrel. After applying for leave I have been recuperating at home." Prefectural Magistrate Dong was just asking casually. Although he wasn't in the Yamen, the security in the prefectural city was better than before. As the prefectural magistrate, he had specially studied the interrogation methods of the Anshi Yamen's bailiffs and bailiffs, as well as the division of districts. He planned to have the other counties follow suit in a few days. Professor Feng examined Li Yi from the side. He was surprised. After not seeing him for so many days, this rude young man seemed to have changed into a different person. He had become so humble. He wasn't used to it. The new year is approaching. We need more people to maintain the security in the city. As the county magistrate, I am responsible. If you are feeling well, you should return to the Yamen as soon as possible." Prefectural Magistrate Dong nodded and suddenly said, "If I remember correctly, the Rui workshop is not far from here. I'm also tired from walking. Why don't we go to your place to rest for a while and have a cup of tea? What do you think, County Magistrate Li?" Li Yi was stunned. Didn't he just rest for a long time in the theater? Sure enough, the higher the official, the more pretentious. It was not a wise thing to refuse the prefectural magistrate. Li Yi nodded and said, "My lord, please." The Rui workshop was next to the brothel. Although the family no longer lived there, Xiao Huan would still go there to clean it every few days. The room was clean and tidy. It was just enough to rest, but there was no tea. After inviting them to sit down, Li Yi went to the theater to get 2 pots of tea. Prefectural Magistrate Dong had already sat down. When he turned around, he found that the man in the brocade robe didn't follow him in. He stood at the door, raised his head and muttered something. The strokes are elegant and graceful, the strokes are tactful and subtle, like moving clouds and flowing water. Good calligraphy, good calligraphy. Just as Dong Wenyun walked out, he heard the man in the brocade robe looking at the plaque above the shop and couldn't help praising it. He thought to himself that he had actually forgotten that the other party was obsessed with calligraphy and had collected many precious paintings at home. Furthermore, he himself was quite accomplished in calligraphy and painting, so it was normal for him to be attracted to the words on the plaque. Seeing him walk out, the man in the brocade robe looked at Prefectural Magistrate Dong and said, "Wenyun, do you know which master wrote these 3 words? I want to pay a visit. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you to arrange it." "There is no need to arrange it. The master is right there. If you have any questions, go ask him yourself." Prefectural Magistrate Dong pointed in a direction with a strange expression and said. The man in the brocade robe turned around and saw the young man just now walking over with 2 pots of tea. The man in the brocade robe looked back at Prefectural Magistrate Dong with an expression of disbelief. If these 3 words were written by that young man, I will eat this plaque. The man in the brocade robe didn't believe a single word of what Dong Wenyun said just now. These 3 words were written with strong and experienced strokes. It was impossible to write without decades of practice. Moreover, this was done by someone who was extremely accomplished in calligraphy. If it was an ordinary person, they might not be able to do it even after hundreds of years. This young man was at most in his early 20s. How could he have such a level of skill? It was precisely because he was proficient in calligraphy that the man in the brocade robe was so confident. If he didn't know that the young man was called the #1 talent of the Jing Kingdom by the Governor of Education, who was excellent in both poetry and calligraphy, and was able to write a legendary work like Rules for Disciples, Prefectural Magistrate Dong naturally wouldn't believe it either. If County Magistrate Li came back a little later, your plaque would be gone. Li Yi, who walked over, looked at Prefectural Magistrate Dong with a confused expression. He didn't know what to say. Chapter 270. In the Rui Square, Magistrate Dong sat on a chair and leisurely sipped tea. The man in embroidered robes walked around the shop, his gaze never leaving the calligraphy on the wall. A few guards stood at the door and occasionally glanced at the young man in the room. Their eyes were full of surprise. Professor Feng was not too surprised. Although this Li Yi's personality was mischievous, his talent was real. No one could deny this. Official Yan's plaque was for sure this time. As the man in embroidered robes walked around, he couldn't help but click his tongue in surprise. These paintings were strange and unconventional. He had never seen such a painting technique in his life. However, what shocked him was the various poems inscribed on the paintings. Good calligraphy. The person who inscribed these poems was definitely a master in calligraphy. If it wasn't for the fact that he was very familiar with the calligraphy of the few famous calligraphy masters in the Jing Kingdom, he would certainly have thought that the other person was one of them. Young man, did these paintings really come from your hands? The man in embroidered robes still couldn't believe that the master he had wanted to meet was actually such a young man. He looked at Li Yi and asked. Li Yi raised his hands in a salute and said, I had nothing better to do, so I casually wrote and drew. Please excuse me, sir. Magistrate Dong had already introduced him earlier. The person in front of him was a high-ranking official from the capital. Although he didn't know his position, he was certainly much more important than a small county officer like him. He couldn't be lacking in the necessary etiquette. I had nothing better to do, so I casually wrote and drew. A rare blush appeared on the man in embroidered robes' face. He had studied this field for more than 20 years, but he couldn't even compare to a young man who casually wrote and drew, in front of an old friend. This old face was a bit embarrassing. Originally he had thought that if there really was an unknown master hiding in Qing'anfu, he would definitely not miss this opportunity. He would prepare gifts, pay a visit and receive some guidance. Perhaps then he would break through the difficult situation that he had been stuck in for a few years. However, the master had been changed to a young person, so naturally, it wasn't so easy to ask for guidance. Seeing the conflicted expression on his face, Prefectural Magistrate Dong found it funny and said, If I remember correctly, Brother Yin just said that if the words on the signboard were truly written by County Lieutenant Li, I should eat it. I wonder if Assistant Minister Yan's words still count? Of course it counts. The man in embroidered robes snorted coldly and said, My words have always carried enormous weight. When have I ever gone back on my word? Gujiang, take down that signboard. We'll use it to accompany the wine when we get back. He strode to the door and ordered a guard. The guard didn't hesitate either. He leaped up and tapped twice on the wall. His entire body climbed onto the signboard, and he quickly removed the signboard with the words Rui Square written on it. He held the signboard firmly as he jumped to the ground. The action of tearing down the plaque was done in one go, natural and smooth. It was obvious that this was not the first time he had done this. This scene made Professor Feng's jaw drop. Magistrate Dong helplessly rubbed the space between his brows. Based on his personality, he should have known. When he was in the capital, he didn't know how many plaques had been taken down by him. It was to the extent that people who had hired a master to inscribe their inscriptions would take down their plaques and hide them at night to prevent them from being stolen at night. He probably had his eyes on this signboard from the very beginning. Magistrate Dong looked up to the sky and sighed. If he had known earlier, he would have taken the initiative to gain the upper hand. He wouldn't have let this fellow have it so easily. One had to know that he had his eyes on this signboard a long time ago. As for asking Li Yi to specially inscribe his inscription with his status, he couldn't bring himself to do it. It's rare to come across such a good dish to go with wine today. Brother Wenyun, take your time and drink your tea. I'll make a move first. The man in embroidered robes laughed heartily and strode out. Stealing in broad daylight. Yen, do you still have any shame? Magistrate Dong shouted from inside the room. Haha, how can the affairs of a scholar be described as stealing? The man in embroidered robes laughed wildly. The guard carrying the signboard followed closely behind the man in embroidered robes. Under Li Yi's astonished gaze, he disappeared into the crowd. He tore down the signboard just like that. He didn't even ask for the shop owner's opinion. Wasn't he being too damn direct? He even said he was a high-ranking official from the capital. Were all officials in the capital like this? Haha, that's his personality. He's obsessed with calligraphy and has torn down countless signboards in his life. Now that this signboard is in his hands, I'm afraid he won't be able to get it back. Magistrate Dong stood up and said somewhat helplessly, I will compensate you for the losses here. What else could Li Yi say? In the Jing kingdom, from the emperor and princess to the low-ranking officials, they were all the same. They liked to take other people's things for free. You can take away the signboard, but at the very least, you should at least show some appreciation, right? Li Yi quickly got what he wanted. A man walked in and placed a piece of paper on the table. He said, This is my lord's name card. If you come to the capital, you can use this name card to find him at the Yen Manor. At first, Li Yi thought it was a banknote. After looking at it for a while, he found that there was nothing on the paper except for the word, yen. Was this the so-called name card? There wasn't even a complete name. It was extremely sloppy. Although the shop owner didn't accept money when the signboard was made, he wouldn't have exchanged it for such a useless piece of paper. He casually threw the piece of paper on the table. The signboard had been taken away by that guy. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to get it back. After a while, when the Rui workshop reopened, he would have to order another one. Professor Feng saw that Li Yi didn't think much of Sir Yan's name card and reminded him, Don't underestimate this name card. Sir Yan is an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. The appointment, dismissal, examination, promotion and transfer of civil officials are all handled by the Ministry of Personnel. Making friends with Sir Yan won't be bad for your future promotion. Li Yi didn't know the background of the man in embroidered robes, but Professor Feng couldn't be clearer about it. The Yan family was considered a large family in the Jing kingdom. Many people in the family held high positions and were deeply trusted by His Majesty. Making friends with the Yan family would certainly make his career much smoother. Although the two of them didn't see eye to eye, Professor Feng only disliked him for not making progress. This was the professional quality of being a professor of the prefectural school. There were no personal grudges. His kind reminder this time was only in the hope that he could change his bad habits and work hard to obtain scholarly honors. Serving the country as soon as possible was the right path. Li Yi didn't expect Professor Feng to say these words to him. Seeing the sincerity in his tone, he was slightly moved. Although the two of them didn't get along, it was undeniable that Professor Feng was a true gentleman. Putting away the name card, Li Yi bowed to him with a solemn expression and said, I'll remember it. You're worth teaching. Professor Feng's expression softened and he said with satisfaction when he saw the change in him. He had once again guided a young man with limitless potential from the wrong path to the right path. He felt a great sense of accomplishment. This was the most talented and capable young man he had ever seen. Professor Feng really didn't want him to live a mediocre life, so he said again, With your talent, it's a waste of your talent to be a mere county lieutenant. I have many friends in the capital who can write a few recommendation letters for you. You can go out and visit them. Coupled with your relationship with Sir Yan, if they jointly recommend you to His Majesty, I'm afraid you'll definitely become a county magistrate. As long as you work hard and make some achievements, there's a high chance that you'll be transferred to the capital in 10 years. Within 20 years, it's not impossible for you to be in the imperial court. Professor Feng's spittle flew everywhere as he spoke. It was as if his blood was about to boil. Cough. Thank you, Professor Feng. It's just that I've yet to recover from my injuries. Let's talk about this another time. Li Yi said awkwardly as he covered his chest and coughed a few times. What do you mean we'll talk about it in the future? Young man, how can you be so ignorant? Professor Feng frowned and reprimanded him again. We are scholars and it is our duty to serve the country. Li rubbed his slightly swollen head. This old man, here he comes again. Chapter 271. Since you are favored by the princess, you should be diligent in the future. Don't say that you don't want to be an official anymore. I really hope to see the day when you and I become officials in the same court. Magistrate Dong said a few words of encouragement and then left with Professor Feng. It was obvious that he saw Li Yi as a junior with a bright future. Professor Feng said a few words. When he left, he still felt that although this seedling had changed, the change was not complete and there was still a lot of room for improvement. If he could become a top official in the future, he could also boast to his old friends that he was the one who made the minister or the prime minister realize their mistakes and work hard to get to where they are today. Li put away the name card. He didn't want to go to the capital to visit Lord Yan. However, according to Professor Feng, this piece of paper seemed to be worth a penny. He just didn't know how much it could be sold for, but it would definitely be worth 100 taels. After closing the door, he saw Xiao Huan coming out of the tile-roofed house with red eyes. He thought that someone bullied her. Before he had time to ask her, the little servant girl took the initiative to say that she was touched by the love between Ning Kaichen and Ye Xiaoqian. The little girl's body was not yet mature, but she was very emotional. When she heard the story for the first time, she cried. She must have cried a lot just now. She was a little depressed at first, but after Li Yi bought her a sugar figurine, she held it in her hand and couldn't bear to eat it. She just looked at it. Li Yi bit off the head of the sugar figurine, and the rest was easily eaten by Xiao Huan. Li Yi wandered on the streets of the prefecture with the little servant girl. At the same time, the princess and her people, who were travel-worn, finally arrived at the capital after a few days of travel. There were already imperial guards waiting outside the city. They cleared the way, leaving a trail of dust behind them to the palace. Is this the celestial punishment that Emingzi mentioned in the letter? In the main hall, Emperor Jing put his hands behind his back and looked at a few fist-sized black clay jars on the table. He couldn't hide the doubt on his face. Yes, father. Don't look down on these small jars. Although they are small, they have the power to destroy the world. After many days of travel, Emingzi couldn't hide the exhaustion on her face. But the matter of celestial punishment was too important. After entering the palace, she didn't take any rest and put it on her father's desk as quickly as possible. Emperor Jing still had some doubt on his face. How could the power of celestial punishment be in the hands of a human? Even he, as the emperor, didn't have this qualification. Changde, who had been accompanying Emperor Jing, also had a trace of suspicion on his old face. It was incredible that such a small thing had the power to destroy the world. His Majesty had let him read the letter, and he still had a lot of doubts about the princess's description. Seeing is believing. Li Mingzhu knew that this matter sounded unbelievable. If she did not see it with her own eyes, she would not have believed it no matter what. If father doesn't believe it, you can see the power of this thing with your own eyes. Okay. Emperor Jing laughed and said, I will personally see how it can destroy the world. After saying that, he reached out to pick up the clay jar on the table. Father, you can't. Li Mingzhu moved faster than him and picked up the heaven's punishment first. She looked at Emperor Jing, who looked at her in confusion, and explained, This thing is extremely dangerous. If you are not careful, it will be triggered. Father is the emperor, so you can't take risks. She turned to look at Changde and said, Let Chief Chang do it. When Changde heard this, the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch, but he quickly said, Princess is right. Your Majesty's body is priceless. You can't take risks. Let this old servant do it for you. He looked back at Emingzhu and asked, May I ask, Princess, how do I use this thing? Use a match to ignite the wire outside. Emingzhu pointed to the wire outside the clay jar and said. Seeing that Chief Chang took out a match and seemed to be about to carry out this great experiment in this palace, Mingzhu's heart suddenly jumped and she shouted, Wait! Your Highness, is there anything else? Changde raised his head and looked at her with a puzzled face. Emingzhu glared at him and said, It's too dangerous here. Take it outside and try it. She had seen the power of celestial punishment countless times, especially under the inspiration of Li Yi. After several days and nights of improvement by Shen Liang, the power had increased by more than one level. If it was really triggered in this palace, all of them would be buried inside if they were not careful. Chief Steward Chang didn't understand how dangerous a small jar could be with so many guards around His Majesty. Her Highness was being a little too careful. Then listen to Emingzhu and go outside. Emperor Jing did not care and said with a smile. His Majesty had spoken. Although he felt that it was not necessary, Changde still went out. Of course, the celestial punishment for the experiment would not be mixed with iron nails and pieces of broken iron. This thing could even penetrate the wall. If something happened to his imperial father, no one could bear the responsibility. Not to mention the iron pieces, even the broken clay jar was very dangerous when it exploded. A guard of the princess's residence lost an arm because of this. If it was not for another person who kicked him at the critical moment, he would have to pay the price of more than just an arm. Originally, when he walked out of the palace, Jianghu was ready to light the thing in his hand and throw it out. However, the princess insisted on finding an abandoned small courtyard to experiment. He was very puzzled that Princess Yongla, who had always been bold since she was a child, suddenly became so timid. However, he could not disobey the princess's orders. He had no choice but to choose an abandoned palace, lit the fuse with a match and threw it in. Boom! Jianghu, who was standing under the wall of the palace, only heard the princess shout, "Be careful," from afar. There was a loud rumbling sound behind him. He, who was disturbed by the loud sound, even forgot to dodge and was crushed under the collapsed wall of the palace. After the loud sound, there was a dead silence. The indifferent look on Emperor Jing's face disappeared and was flushed. He covered his chest and gasped for breath. "Imperial doctor, call the imperial doctor." The dozen or so guards around them were already in a mess. Some of them were kneeling on the ground and kowtowing. Some of them were standing on the ground with pale faces and weak legs. Finally, one of them recovered and ran to find the imperial physician. In the distance there were even more panicked figures. The entire imperial palace was in an uproar because of this earth-shattering sound. Crash! A pile of bricks and stones flew out from the collapsed palace wall. Jianghu, whose clothes were tattered and his face was covered with dust, climbed up and patted the dust on his body. His old face was full of horror. The palace wall collapsed and there was a huge scorched pit at the foot of the wall. The palace was in a mess. Was this the power of the celestial punishment? Chapter 272. Seeing the palace wall turn into rubble in front of him, Jianghu finally realized the true power of the heavenly punishment. His tattered clothes were instantly drenched in sweat. No one had thought that the power of the heavenly punishment would be so terrifying. The princess was not exaggerating at all. Destroying the world, this was really destroying the world. Just now he even felt the ground under his feet shake. When he thought that he wanted to experiment in the palace, cold sweat appeared on his forehead again. If he really did that just now, the palace would definitely be destroyed. Even if something happened to His Majesty, it would not be enough for him, Jianghu, to die 10,000 times. For a moment, Jianghu's heart was filled with deep gratitude towards the princess. At this time, dozens of armored guards had surrounded the place. Several eunuchs dressed in gray appeared beside Jing Emperor and looked around vigilantly. Jing Emperor panted for a while and his breathing gradually stabilized. His face was still a little flushed. He waved his hand to shake off the guards who were supporting him and drove away the imperial doctor who was panting as he ran over. He strode towards the direction of the collapsed palace wall. Looking at the gray and black ground and rubble, Jing Emperor was silent for a long time. Suddenly he laughed out loud. "Haha, what a heavenly punishment, what a heavenly punishment. With this divine object, it is enough to protect the stability of our Jing kingdom for decades." A small black clay pot had such power that even the sturdy palace wall could not withstand the power of the heavenly punishment. It could be imagined that if a few dozen or even dozens of them attacked at the same time, it could really be said to be destroying the world. Under the power of the heavenly punishment, even the sturdy city wall would be easily destroyed like tofu. The Jing kingdom had been weak for a long time and there were strong enemies eyeing it. In these years, he had worked hard to manage a big country to the current situation it was in. It was not easy to find a moment of stability, but the torture of illness had become more and more serious. When he followed the late emperor, it would be the time when the stability and peace of the Jing kingdom would be disrupted. Because of this, he often could not eat or sleep in peace. However, the appearance of such a national treasure was like a ray of light in the darkness, making him seem to see infinite hope. With the Jing country's current national strength, they didn't need to expand their territory, but with this object as a deterrent, it was likely that no one would dare to have any ideas about the Jing country. This old servant congratulates His Majesty and the Jing kingdom. Jianghu had served Emperor Jing for decades. How could he not know what he was thinking? A smile also appeared on his wrinkled face. He knelt on one knee and said loudly, "Wah." The The surrounding guards immediately knelt down as well. Although they didn't know what was going on, they still knew what was going on. Their orderly and loud voices spread far and wide, resounding throughout the entire palace. Congratulations to His Majesty and the Jing Kingdom. Congratulations to His Majesty and the Jing Kingdom. Congratulations to His Majesty and the Jing Kingdom. In the letter, Emingzu said that this item can be used as a weapon to break a city. At the same time, it is also a treasure to kill enemies on the battlefield. The broken pieces of the jar are embedded in the wall. If it is used on the battlefield, it will immediately become a hell on earth. In the palace, Emperor Jing looked at the few jars on the table and nodded with satisfaction. Father, these are only used for testing. The real, sky punishment, will be mixed with iron nails and pieces to increase its power. Once it explodes, there will be no survivors within 3 feet. Emingzu pointed at the jar on the table and said. Changde heard this and took a deep breath. Even the broken jars could be embedded in the wall. What kind of power was that? If it was an iron weapon, if the sky punishment that he ignited was like what the princess said, he would have been turned into a sieve by now. An individual's martial strength was not worth mentioning in front of the power of heaven. After being stunned for a moment, Emperor Jing's smile became wider. He said the word good a few times in a row. Suddenly, a trace of sharpness appeared in his eyes. Qi Kingdom, the new year is coming. I plan to give you a big gift. I hope you will like it. He seemed to have seen the scene of the Qi Kingdom soldiers fleeing in panic in front of the sky punishment. He felt the depression that had accumulated in his heart for a long time was swept away. He turned to look at Emingzu and asked, "How much does it cost?" Emingzu said respectfully, "Father, it is easy to make. The materials used are cheap and the cost is very low." The sky punishment was powerful. Even if it was expensive to make, Emperor Jing would not give it up. Now that he heard that it was cheap, he was overjoyed. After thinking for a while, he looked at her and asked, "Who made it? Where is he now?" A trace of hesitation flashed on Mingzhu's face, but it quickly disappeared. She said, "The one who made the sky punishment was a performer called Xin Liang in Qingyan Prefecture. His ancestors were all cigarette makers. He accidentally discovered the formula of the sky punishment. After I learned about it, I immediately controlled him and brought him to the capital. The people of the princess's mansion also participated in the production of the sky punishment. However, only Xin Liang and I know the core formula." Emperor Jing let out a long sigh of relief. The last trace of worry in his heart was gone. In the future, Xin Liang will be responsible for supervising the production of the sky punishment. He is not allowed to contact outsiders. I will send people to mark out a place outside the city for the research and development of the sky punishment. In addition, I will send 50 craftsmen and 1,000 imperial guards to the war zone. I want to see whether the soldiers of the Qi Kingdom are more powerful, or the power of the Jing Kingdom. Emperor Jing issued several orders in a row. When he looked back and saw the tired expression on his daughter's face, he said softly, "It has been hard on you. Go back and rest. I will leave the rest to you." "Father, this is the formula of the sky punishment." Emingzu nodded. She was indeed tired after the long journey. After offering the formula of the gunpowder, she slowly left the palace. Emperor Jing took the formula and looked at it for a long time. He picked up a clay pot and carefully examined it in his hand. Changde personally felt the power and terror of this thing. He wanted to stay far away from this palace. When he saw the emperor pick up the sky punishment, he hurriedly said, "Your Majesty?" Emperor Jing waved his hand and interrupted him. He also put the clay pot back to its original position. "You are indeed the person I like. Li, I am really curious. How many blessings can you bring to the Jing Kingdom?" Emperor Jing said slowly. If Emingzu was here, she would definitely be shocked by his words at this moment. Changde thought for a while and said, "Your Majesty, the matter of the sky punishment is unusual. Do you want to?" Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "No need. Emingzu will not choose the wrong person. I will not choose the wrong person either. Since there is a Xin Liang, there will definitely be a second and a third one. Pass down the order. Strictly prohibit the sale of saltpeter and sulfur. Let the government buy them all." After the order was issued, someone behind him immediately responded and walked out of the palace. "Emingzu has never lied to me before. This is the first time. You are more capable than I thought." Thinking of the young man who talked to him in the garden of the prince's residence, a strange smile appeared on Emperor Jing's face. "How should I reward you for offering such an important weapon of the country? Forget it. It's almost the end of the year. I will let you be free for a few more days. After Emperor Jing muttered a few words to himself, he issued a few more orders. Chapter 273. According to the customs of the royal family, after a princess came of age, she could no longer stay in the palace. Although she didn't have to go to a fief, she still had to build her own residence outside the palace. Princesses who lived in the palace were either underage or very favored. Princesses like Princess Yongla, who had passed the age of 15 but still had their own residence in the palace and didn't have to leave the palace, were few and far between. Many imperial censors submitted memorials about this, but they were all suppressed by the emperor. This showed how much he liked Princess Yongla. Of course, Princess Yongla was the daughter of the empress, the only daughter of the emperor and the empress. It was very normal for her to have such preferential treatment. Emingzu walked out of the hall, and the old woman waiting outside followed behind her. They walked towards a palace in the rear palace. Emingzu said as they walked, "Imperial father wants to send 50 craftsmen to the battlefield. Let Xinliang go with them. Half of the people in the princess residence who participated in making Tianfa will go with them as well. Tianfa is too dangerous, they have to be careful at all times." Without experiencing it for themselves, they didn't know how dangerous Tianfa was. Even if they knew the recipe, it would be a disaster if they weren't careful. The people of the princess residence had memorized all the rules and regulations that Li Yi had laid out for her. With them following her, it would be much safer. "Don't worry, princess. I will arrange it immediately when I return," the old woman responded. Then a trace of hesitation appeared on her face. She whispered a few more words in her ear. "What? Imperial father already knows?" She stopped and her expression changed. The old woman nodded and said, "His Majesty's personal palace maids all know about this. It's not a secret. Let him see me immediately." Mingzhu's expression darkened. "Nanny, why is the princess looking for me?" In the princess residence, a young man followed the old woman and asked in confusion. Naturally, this old woman doesn't know about the princess. The old woman said faintly and pointed to the back garden of the princess residence. "The princess is there. Go there yourself." The man saw a figure in the garden and suppressed the uneasiness in his heart. He strode over. "Princess," he said respectfully and stood at the back waiting quietly. Emingzu turned her head and a trace of disappointment appeared on her face as she said, "Guard Lu, you've been working in the princess residence for quite some time, right?" "Princess, I am indebted to the princess for her promotion. I have been in the princess residence for 5 years." The young man said slowly. "From tomorrow onwards, you will be Shen Liang's personal bodyguard. Tian Fa's matter is of great importance. You must ensure that the secret formula will not be leaked, and you must not let anything happen to Shen Liang." Emingzu looked at a plum blossom that had yet to bloom in the garden as she spoke plainly. As if he had thought of something, the young man's face suddenly turned pale. His knees went soft and he knelt down. He kowtowed as if he was pounding garlic and shouted, "Thank you, Your Highness. From now on, as long as the secret recipe exists, this subordinate will exist. The secret recipe is faulty, this subordinate will atone for it with his life." 1,000 imperial guards left the imperial palace in the middle of the night. The sound of the horses' hooves on the stone floor seemed to shake the entire capital. No one knew what had happened. The people in the city all closed their doors and windows and hid in their homes. After the dust settled, pairs of eyes peeked out from the cracks in the doors, guessing what had happened. The palace had not made such a big move in a long time. As for the officials in the capital and the rich and noble families, many of them did not sleep the whole night. Their backs were drenched in cold sweat. For so many imperial guards to be mobilized, something big must have happened. They just didn't know who would be the unlucky one this time. They just hoped it wouldn't be them. When the sky brightened and nothing special happened, everyone could finally relax. For a moment, the rich and noble families all sent out carriages and horses. Officials of all levels walked around each other to gather information. Compared to this matter, the matter of the princess residence changing the guard leader was not worth mentioning. At the same time, in the faraway Qing and prefectural city, it was far from the somber atmosphere of the capital. As the new year approached, the prefectural city became livelier day by day. After a busy year, it was finally the day when everything could rest. Other than the peddlers and a few people with special professions, most people would choose to give themselves a holiday and enjoy life. The large and small brothels inside and outside the city were packed from morning to night. In particular, the theaters in the prefectural city, as well as the large brothels that had been built outside the city, became the favorite place of entertainment for most people. There were all kinds of performances, puppet shows, movie shows, and all kinds of programs. It was enough to dazzle the eyes. If one was tired of these, they could go to the large brothels to watch the stage plays. They were all new plays and were brilliant. It was definitely worth spending a few copper coins for them. In order to maintain the security in the city, the government sent out more bailiffs. From time to time, the soldiers of the city defense could be seen walking on the street. Sometimes, bailiffs were mixed in the crowd. The roadside vendors greeted them warmly and gave them hot buns and cakes. The bailiffs did not refuse. They took a bite with a smile and continued to patrol. Although he felt that he could beat a cow to death with his current physical condition, Li was still in a state of recuperation. Anyway, before Her Highness left, she had asked for a long sick leave for him. The task of maintaining the security was handed over to County Magistrate Liu. After all, capable people should do more work. As for ordinary small cases, with Liu's help, there wouldn't be any problems. This kid was born to do this. No one knew how he had been muddle-headed in the past, but this time he suddenly became enlightened. He had solved several old cases, and his reputation had spread across several counties. It was said that no criminal could hold on for the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn under his hands. This was how a qualified subordinate should be. Li was extremely proud of his discerning eyes. When he woke up, he washed his face with cold water. After shivering for a while, he suddenly felt refreshed. Today was the Lunar New Year. According to the customs here, people should start to buy New Year's goods and offer sacrifices to the kitchen god. The customs of the Lunar New Year in later generations were different in different places. Li did not know how to celebrate the Lunar New Year here. It was enough for Xiao Huan and Rui to know. After what happened last time, they no longer lit the stove at home at night. But they still lit the fire every morning. For the first time, Li felt that carbon monoxide was also a good thing. It could actually promote the relationship between husband and wife. He was not Lu Xiaohui. He could not resist sleeping with such a beautiful wife every night. Although he had not broken through the last line of defense, he had taken a lot of advantages. It was just that he felt a little uncomfortable when he got up in the morning. When Rui brought him toiletries, her face was always red. Chapter 274. After the Little New Year, there were only 6 or 7 days left before the Spring Festival. The Little New Year's Day was considered a relatively important festival. Early in the morning, Xiao Huan took a rag and carefully wiped every room. Even Mississippi Lu was sweeping the courtyard with a broom, which was a rare occurrence. Although the courtyard was originally so clean that there was not even a single fallen leaf. Just now, Zhuzi ran over and gave a thick stack of window flowers. They were of different shapes and were extremely beautiful. Xiao Huan said that Aunt Fang's skill in cutting window flowers was unique in the village. She would send some to her house every year. After saying that, she took the window flowers and went into the house to find paste. When Li walked out of the courtyard, he saw that every household was busy. Even the naughty children were not idle. Each of them took a small broom and swept in front of the door. As they swept, it became a broom war. Dust flew everywhere and screams could be heard. After a while, an adult ran out of the courtyard and dragged the naughty children back home by their ears. It did not matter if it was a festival or not to beat children. After a while, the naughty children's screams came from inside. When he walked out of the gate of the house, the atmosphere of the new year was everywhere. Counting the days, he had been here for a full half a year. Before he had time to reminisce, a clear voice came from behind him. "Excuse me, does Lu Rui live here?" Li turned around and saw a young girl about the same age as Rui standing behind him. She was carrying a small bag on her back and holding a long sword in her hand. She was standing there and looking at him. "Young master, what's wrong?" A man strode out from inside and stood beside Li. "Why are you looking for Rui?" Li looked at her and asked. Looking at the young girl's attire, she looked like a person from Jianghu. It seemed that she did not have good intentions. "She is indeed here." A hint of understanding appeared on the young girl's face. She said lightly and strode into the house. "Stop." This young girl was obviously looking for trouble. How could old Su, who was standing beside Li, let her enter so easily? He reached out to grab her shoulder. "Humph, your martial arts are too weak. I won't fight with you." The girl lightly struck out with her palm and landed it on old Su's shoulder. Old Su involuntarily took a few steps back and leaned against the door to stabilize himself. Just as he was about to fight again, Li waved his hand and said, "There's no rush. Let's see what she wants first. She didn't look like she was here for revenge. Ever since all the bandits from the Greenwood Forest were killed, they hadn't met anyone else who was blind. Li was not worried at all. Rui had always been modest about her martial arts skills. Last time he indirectly asked Mississippi Lu about it, and the answer he got was that the number of people in the entire Jing kingdom who could defeat his sister could be counted on one hand. Li looked left and right, looking up and down, but he didn't feel that this hand included the girl. You're going the wrong way. See, the person you're looking for is in the yard over there. Seeing the girl wander around the house like a headless fly, Li kindly pointed her in the right direction. Young master, this girl is. Fang walked out of his yard and looked at the strange girl, asking in confusion. Li shook his head, indicating that he didn't know either. The girl entered the yard with a small bag on her back. When she looked up, she saw a woman about her age or maybe just a little older, standing in the yard, sweeping with a broom in her hand. The first time she saw the woman, she knew she was a master. You're Lu Rui, the number 1 on the Wulin hero list and the heaven list? The girl untied the small bag on her back and threw it aside. With a flash of cold light, she pulled out the long sword in her hand and held it in front of her chest. She bowed to the woman in front of her and said, I want to challenge you. If I win, you have to give up your number 1 position on the heaven list to me. Wulin hero list? What's that? Fang was dumbfounded. He only understood that the girl wanted to challenge the second young mistress. As for the rest, he didn't understand a single word. Fang and the others didn't understand, but Li Yi did. The Wulin hero list was something that Oldman's son had created not long ago under his instructions. After a comprehensive analysis of the strength and reputation of the masters in Wulin, the ranking would be made. The higher the ranking, the stronger the master. This list was mainly divided into the heaven list, the earth list, and the mortal list. The heaven list was the strongest, followed by the earth list, and then the mortal list. Above these 3 lists there was a guru list. However, there were only a few people on the guru list. Every one of them was a famous guru master in Wulin. With a stomp of their feet, the whole Wulin would shake. The heaven list, the earth list, and the mortal list had 100 people on each list. Of course, time was limited, so Oldman's son and a few old friends had only sorted out 50 people on the heaven list. In order to ensure the authority of the list, Wu Er found a few friends in the martial arts world to participate in the ranking of the list. Some storytellers in the brothels outside the city made the deeds of the heroes on the list into stories, 1 to 10, 10 to 100. Soon, even an 8-year-old child was familiar with the affairs of the martial arts world. Originally, the people of the martial arts world did not care much about these things. However, the person who made the list seemed to be very familiar with the martial arts world. The heaven list almost covered all the famous top experts in the martial arts world. There was also a very detailed explanation of their ranking order. It was able to convince people. Gradually, it actually gained the recognition of most people. At this time, many people couldn't sit still. Needless to say, those on the guru list were all seniors who had dominated Wulin for decades. They didn't dare to compare with them. The few people at the top of the heaven list had outstanding achievements, so they didn't have any objections to being ranked in front of them. For example, the number 1 woman on the heaven list, surnamed Lu, in the past 2 years, the number of masters who had fallen in her hands could not be counted. Dozens of Lulin masters went to find trouble with her, but none of them returned. They were sincerely convinced that she was ranked first. However, those who were on the list were naturally secretly delighted. People lived in this world for nothing more than fame and profit. No matter how high one's martial arts was, it was useless if others didn't know about it. Everyone hoped that their strength would be recognized by others. For scholars, there was a Zhuang Yuan, Bang Yan, and Tan Hua in the imperial examinations. For martial artists, there was a Wulin hero list. It was a very normal thing. However, although there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts, which martial artist would be willing to admit that they were second? Li Si, who was ranked 50th on the heaven list after a little joy, was quickly dissatisfied. That bastard Zhang San was actually ranked 49th on the heaven list. Why was he ranked ahead of him? That bastard was obviously no match for him. If he could defeat him, wouldn't his ranking increase? Little did he know that Zhang San, who was ranked 49th, was also feeling uncomfortable. Years ago he had fought with Wang Er, who was ranked 48th on the heaven list. Although he lost, he had improved rapidly in the past few years. If he met him again, the outcome was uncertain. Why was he ranked ahead of him? Also, who was that Zhao Yuanwei who was ranked 40th? Was there such a person in the martial arts world? Of course, those who were not on the list were not very satisfied either. They thought that their strength was greater than those on the list. Why were they not on the list? Of course, no one would think of finding those storytellers to add themselves to the list. That would be laughed at by their peers in the martial arts world. Moreover, they did not know where the list came from. They could not find the person at all. Moreover, he was so familiar with the martial arts world. It meant that he must be someone in the martial arts world. There was no doubt about this. Since he had already acknowledged this list, of course he had to rely on his own strength to get on it. The others on the list could not be underestimated. However, the guy ranked 40th was unheard of. He was the best way to make a name for himself. In short, the martial arts world, which had never been peaceful, was once again stirred up because of this list. Although it could not be described as a reign of terror, the popularity of martial arts competitions was at its peak in the past few decades. Seeing the girl holding a sword in her hand and looking at Rui with an eager expression on her face, Li rubbed the area between his eyebrows, feeling a slight headache. It seemed that he had inadvertently brought quite a bit of trouble to Rui. Chapter 275. Lu Rui raised her head and glanced at the girl. She continued to sweep the yard. She had heard about the Wulin hero ranking and was unhappy that her name was not on it. If her sister had not stopped her, she would have gone to look for trouble with the second master on the heaven list. She had completely mastered the essence of Tai Chi sword. After her swordsmanship improved, she faced a new bottleneck. This time it would not be easy to break through. A goal that was too far away would always make people lose motivation. She did not practice much these days. According to Li Yi's story, sweeping was also a form of cultivation, so she decided to try her best. However, although her swordsmanship did not improve, she was much calmer. When she was free, she would sweep the yard with a broom. The yard was cleaner than ever. "Excuse me," she said without looking up when she swept the girl's feet. "According to the rules of Jianghu, if you don't accept my challenge, the first place on the heaven list will be mine." The girl was not angry when she was ignored. She did not realize that she had recognized the wrong person. She only knew that the girl in front of her was not simple. The first place on the heaven list was a girl. Did that mean that she was the most powerful girl in the Jing kingdom, apart from the grandmasters? Fang crossed his arms and looked like he was watching a show. This girl was really brave to challenge the elder Mississippi. He did not expect that she would mistake the second miss for the elder Mississippi. He did not know if she was lucky or unlucky. In terms of martial arts, the elder miss was definitely more powerful. However, the elder miss was kind and knew when to stop. As for the second miss, she never showed mercy when she fought. "I didn't expect the first place on the heaven list to have such little courage." The girl pouted and turned to leave. "I will tell them that Lu Rui is just SOSO. She does not even have the courage to accept the challenge. How can she be the first?" As soon as the words left her mouth, her expression suddenly changed. She whipped her head around, only to find a fair hand resting on her slender neck. Even if she was a martial arts master, the neck was her weakest part. If the hand exerted a little force, her neck would be broken. "This is a sneak attack." She glared at him and said, unconvinced. Lu Rui held the broom in one hand and let go of her neck with the other. He made a pleased gesture. She could ignore this young girl's challenge, but she would not allow her to tarnish her sister's reputation. The girl stood in front of her with a sword in her hand and asked, "You don't need a weapon?" Lu Rui was too lazy to respond. Her opponent was this little girl, and she did not even have the interest to draw her sword. Be careful. To a true expert, having or not having a weapon didn't make much of a difference. When she turned around to leave just now, she actually had her guard up, but she still managed to grab his neck. This was enough for him to be careful. When he opened his mouth, the long sword was like a spirit snake, swallowing and spitting out cold light as it pierced forward. Her vision blurred, and the figure of the woman in front of her disappeared. Then she felt a tightness on her neck and that white palm appeared on her neck again. "You fought. You can go." Lu Rui released his hand from her neck and continued to sweep the dust on the ground with the broom. Li looked at her with envy. She was calm, carefree and calm. This was the attitude that a master should have. She had hit the opponent's confidence several times. Even if she lost, she had to make her lose wholeheartedly. In the end, she said calmly, "With your talent, go back and practice hard for 30 years, then come back to me." The temperament of a grandmaster was undoubtedly revealed. Of course, there was a small risk in doing this. If the challenger had the halo of a protagonist, after being humiliated, he would suddenly comprehend a peerless martial art. 3 years later he would come back again and kill the Grandmaster with his sword. At the same time he would put on an annual drama of a grassroots counterattack. Li did not see the counterattack. The development of the story was a little different from what he had expected. The young girl stood still for a moment, and suddenly knelt on one knee. She held the sword with both hands and said loudly, "I can't beat you. Please accept me as your disciple." The young girl's turn was very quick. Fang's mouth opened wide and his jaw almost dropped. Li looked at her in surprise. He suddenly felt that the challenge was just a cover. Her ultimate goal was to become his disciple. A hint of surprise flashed in Lu Rui's beautiful eyes, but it was soon hidden. She shook her head and said, "You've got the wrong person. I'm not the person you're looking for and I won't accept you as my disciple. You're much more powerful than me. Only by becoming your disciple can I learn more powerful martial arts. I won't give up." The young girl raised her head and said firmly. The purpose of her trip was to become a disciple. Although she didn't know how good the legendary Lu Rui's martial arts were, the woman in front of her, who was not much older than her, was the most powerful person she had ever seen in her life. Thus, she immediately made up her mind. She picked up the small bag on the ground and carried it on her back. Then she picked up another broom from the corner and swept behind Lu Rui. "Young master, do you want to kick her out?" Fang asked tentatively. "No need. Let her sweep if she wants to," Lu Rui said indifferently before Li could answer. She put down the broom and went into the house. Xiao Huan held Rui's hand and walked out of the house. She asked Li, "Young master, when are we going out to buy? Who's this sister?" "Hee, let's do it. 40 on the hero ranking and heaven ranking. Congratulations, Brother Zhao. I didn't expect Brother Zhao to be so secretive. Brother Zhao was too humble in the past. We were all fooled by you. After we drink our fill we must learn from Brother Zhao." Chuzhou Xiangqing. In Squire Zhao's house, more than 10 Jianghu people drank to their heart's content. They all toasted a man with a goatee sitting at the head of the table. "I don't know who made this up. How can I get a place on the hero ranking?" Squire Zhao said with a dry laugh. He knew his own strength very well. He had some life-saving methods that others didn't know about, but he was definitely not that powerful. "Oh, Brother Zhao, you are wrong. The hero ranking has been recognized by the people of the Jianghu. Everyone is proud to be on the hero ranking. Brother Zhao, you don't have to be humble anymore," someone said with a wave of his hand. Squire Zhao didn't explain this time. This matter was indeed very useful for increasing his reputation. It could probably attract more Jianghu people to join him. It was not a bad thing. "Haha, let's drink." He laughed and temporarily changed the topic. Bang. While everyone was drinking happily, there was suddenly a muffled sound from the side. The door of the Zhao mansion collapsed and dust flew up. A burly figure walked in from outside. "Who are you?" After being stunned for a moment, someone immediately put down his wine bowl and walked over angrily. How dare he destroy the door of the Zhao mansion in front of so many people? Was he looking down on them? He walked to the side of the burly man and was about to stop him, but he was punched by the burly man. He fell to the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with fear. Seeing this, the people around the table all stood up with murderous gazes. "I am Pound of Qingzhou, ranked 41st on the heaven roll. Which one of you is Squire Zhao? I want to see who is ranked ahead of me." The burly man laughed wildly. His voice was as loud as a giant bell. "So you are a master on the heaven roll. Sorry for not recognizing you. A man from Qingzhou dares to challenge Chuzhou? Do you think there is no one in Chuzhou? You are only ranked 41st on the heaven roll. How can you be compared to our Brother Zhao?" "Yes, Brother Zhao, show him your power." Hearing that this person was only ranked 41st on the heaven roll, behind Squire Zhao, everyone's faces relaxed and they urged him. No one noticed that Zhao Yuanwei, who was hiding at the back of the crowd, was pale as a sheet. Chapter 276. A few years ago, when he could only eat one meal at a time, it was already good enough to have a bowl of porridge during Chinese New Year. Now that he was not short of money, he could not continue living like that. Shopping for Chinese New Year goods was a must. After walking around the streets, Li could not carry all the things he bought with his 2 hands. "Martial uncle, let me carry it." The girl who insisted on becoming Rui's disciple hurried over and said. Unknowingly he had grown up a generation. Li enjoyed being called martial uncle, but he still shook his head to show his refusal. Although the girl seemed to want to be Rui's disciple, her master did not agree. As the martial uncle, he could not overstep his boundaries and do things for her. Mississippi Lu did not agree, nor did she chase her away. The girl simply followed them. She did not put down the sword in her hand, but the small bag on her back was left at home. Without a third hand, when they walked to another street, Li could no longer carry anything in his hands. He bought a fish from the fish shop and was going to make sweet and sour fish at home. The girl took the fish from Xiao Huan at the right time and held it in her hand, then retreated to the back without saying a word. The young maidservant glanced at her. She only knew that this young lady wanted to become the second young Miss disciple, but the second young Miss had not agreed yet. It seemed a little inappropriate to let her carry things. Just as she was about to refuse, she turned her head and saw Li Yi, who was covered in things. "Young master, let me help you carry some." She hurried over to help Li Yi. After all, Xiao Huan cared for him, unlike Mississippi Lu, who was carefree and only wanted to buy the things she liked, but her hands were always empty. Since he already carried a fish, he did not mind letting her carry more things. With half of his luggage taken away, he felt much more relaxed and had the energy to think about other things. The creation of the Wulin hero ranking was naturally not done on a whim, nor did it take up too much of a factor. As for Zhao Yuanwei, he was just randomly assigned a position. It was believed that it would not be long before he was kicked off the ranking, but before that, something unexpected might happen to him. The people of the martial arts world loved fame. The brothels would try their best to perfect their information. Yesterday, Hero Wang of Anxi County carried an old man in his 80s across the river. The next day it would become a topic of great interest to the people. Hero Zhao molested a woman in the streets of Qing'an Prefecture. Within a few days this scandal would spread throughout the martial arts world. Of course, to achieve better results he had to pay more attention to the details. Shocking. Men would be silent while women would cry. What did Hero Qin do to cause the wrath of the heavens and the people? Was it the distortion of human nature or the degeneration of morality behind this incident? Welcome to Old Sun's commentary on Jianghu. I'll see you there tomorrow. Ancient people who had not been poisoned by the circle of friends would not be able to resist such a title. The more righteous a person was, the more they cared about their reputation. Heroes used their martial arts to break the law. Most of the evil deeds were done by people with high martial skills. As the lieutenant of a county, Li Yi had to do something to maintain the peace and order of the area under his jurisdiction. Of course, this method would not work on the infamous bandits in Jianghu who did not care about their reputation. Instead, it would spread their bad reputation even further and increase their arrogance. At this time, it was necessary to bring some positive energy to the murky Wulin. Master Zhang, who was ranked 36th on the chivalrous leaderboard, broke into a bandit's lair alone and killed more than 10 bandits with his own hands. He got rid of a big scourge in Jianghu. According to the latest strength assessment, Master Zhang's ranking rose by 2 places and became 34th on the heavenly leaderboard. The Qingzhou caravan was kidnapped by bandits. Master Qin and Master Li saw injustice and wiped out the bandits. However, they were seriously injured and almost lost their lives. This kind of selfless and fearless spirit was worth learning by everyone. Master Qin and Master Li were named as the stars of Jianghu because of this. They were one of the top 10 figures in Jianghu. The leader of the caravan rewarded them with a lot of gold for saving their lives. The magistrate of Anxi County, Lord Lu, personally came to visit. Positive news like this could be publicized more. Of course, this was a very complicated and tedious job. Old Sun and the others were still in the exploration stage. Li Yi gave them sufficient funds. Seeing how important this matter was to Li Yi, Old Sun had already assigned many people to take care of this matter. Old Sun had a very big dream. He wanted to revitalize this industry so that more and more actors and actresses could eat their fill. This dream could not be realized by himself. Li Yi had now become his hope to realize this dream. One day their brothels would be built in other prefectures or even the capital, or even the entire Jing kingdom. Every time he thought about this, Old Sun's old face would glow. The ranking of the chivalrous leaderboard was updated very quickly. Yesterday, Chuzhou's Zhao Yuanwei, who was ranked 40th, had 3 of his ribs broken by Qingzhou's Pound, who was ranked 41st. The next day their rankings were switched. Those who were ranked at the bottom of the chivalrous leaderboard or those who were not on the leaderboard seemed to have found a breakthrough. They all expressed their desire to challenge Zhao Yuanwei. In view of his injuries, in the spirit of humanitarianism, everyone was willing to give him half a month to recuperate. It was said that in order to decide who would be the first to challenge, a few heroes fought. The scene was very intense. Some of them were even more seriously injured than Zhao Yuanwei. After that, the Zhao family's old house in Chuzhou became empty. More than half of the Zhao family's property was sold. Only a small portion was left for the old servants to take care of. As for Zhao Yuanwei, who was ranked 41st on the heavenly leaderboard, no one knew where he went. Wu Er was the one who told Li Yi these things. Wu Er had now become Old Sun's martial arts consultant. He received a monthly salary of 500 copper coins. All he needed to do was to ask his friends in the martial arts community to pay attention to the big and small matters in the martial arts community. The more valuable the information he provided, the more rewards he would receive. After Old Sun's team organized the information and told it to the people in the martial arts community, they received a large sum of money. A small portion of the money was used to put up rewards. It seemed that he had underestimated Old Sunday. With his efforts, this great cause was becoming more and more prosperous. Almost all the poor actors in Anxi County had been integrated by him. Spacious brothels were also spreading to further places. Due to the declining business of Rui Du and hard liquor, the family's income, which had been decreasing every day, increased again. Even Li Yi had to admit that he had underestimated the huge potential of the brothels. After lying in the courtyard for a short while, Xiao Huan had already come to complain twice. The target of her complaint was, of course, the girl named Yang Liuqing, who was still begging Rui to take her as a disciple. The girl was young, but she was very persistent. Since Rui did not agree, she would come every day before dawn to clean the courtyard, boil water, and chop firewood. After she was done with these chores, she would take a rag and wipe every place in the house until it was spotless. Most of these chores were done by Xiao Huan, but they were all snatched away by her. The servant girl had never been so free in her life. He had told her several times not to come anymore, but she never listened. She did not say a word and only knew how to work hard. Even Li Yi was a little touched by her. Young master, say something about her. She does all the chores and Xiao Huan has nothing to do. The servant girl looked at the girl who started to clean the courtyard with a broom in dissatisfaction and said while hugging Li Yi's arm, "Isn't it good to have nothing to do?" Li Yi knocked her head lightly and said, "Go play with Sister Su and the others. Let her do these chores if she wants to." Before Xiao Huan left, Li Xian walked in from outside and pointed at the unfamiliar girl in the courtyard suspiciously. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Who is she? Is she your new concubine?" Clang. With the sound of a long sword being unsheathed, a sword light slashed over. Chapter 277. Retribution for having a foul mouth always came very fast. The girl named Yang Liuqing had the temperament of a Jianghu person. If there was a disagreement, she would raise her sword. There was a reason why she chose Lu Rui as her master. Of course she wouldn't kill him. The sword was more of a threat. Li Xian's guards didn't care whether she was threatening or really wanted to harm the crown prince. Anyone who dared to use weapons against the crown prince would be treated as an assassin. The two guards shouted. A flash of sword light flashed and collided with Yang Liuqing's sword. There was a sound of metal colliding. The girl couldn't help but take a few steps back. Li Xian's guards were all experts who were picked out of 100 or 1,000. Their strength was obviously better than Yang Liuqing's. Li didn't have a clear understanding of the girl's strength. He only saw her fight with Rui. She was captured alive before she could even make one move. However, this didn't mean that she was weak. Mississippi Lu couldn't be used as a reference. Li was very sure that even Li Xian's guards couldn't last one move against her. After forcing the girl to retreat, the two guards obviously didn't want to let her go. They took the opportunity to press on as if they wanted to capture her alive. There was a sound of weapons clashing in the courtyard. Yang Liuqing had a hard time dealing with one of them. Now that there were two of them, she could only retreat. Soon she was about to retreat into the house. Li was just about to tell Li Xian to let his guards know when to stop. He couldn't blame anyone else for the sins of his mouth. Before he could say anything, the two guard swords were broken into two. One of them had a sword on his neck. The other was shocked. When he was about to explode, the girl glanced at him coldly. It was like a bucket of cold water was poured on his head. He stood there and didn't dare to move. "If you want to fight, go outside. Don't dirty the courtyard," Lu Rui said coldly and entered the house. The two guards didn't even have time to wipe the cold sweat off their foreheads. They picked up the broken weapons on the ground and immediately retreated. They didn't dare to cause trouble for the girl anymore. Just now he didn't manage to see it clearly. He only felt a flash of light before the saber in his hand broke. Then a saber was placed on his neck. He had always known that this woman was not simple, but today he deeply understood how terrifying she was. If she was on the Wulian hero ranking, she would at least be in the top 5. Yang Liuqing watched as the two people who had forced him to the point where he couldn't even fight back fled like stray dogs with their tails between their legs in the blink of an eye. The determination in his eyes deepened as he watched the figure walk into the house. The two guards were chased outside by Li Xian. They lay down on Li Yi's rocking chair comfortably. The chair under them swayed with the rhythm. They couldn't help but sigh. It is said that the royal family is extravagant. In fact, the one who knows the most about extravagant enjoyment is you. Li Yi curled his lips. What kind of world was this? Sleeping in a rocking chair was extravagant. She occupied his seat and said he was extravagant. A random rosewood chair from the prince's mansion could buy dozens or hundreds of his rocking chairs. You are about to get married. Why are you running around all day? If you like it, I will give you this chair. 100 taels of silver as usual. Yang Liuqing stared at Li Xian with an unfriendly gaze. The remaining guard behind Li Xian kept staring at her. After lying down for a long time, Li Yi stretched his waist and said lazily, "I don't have your leisure." Surprisingly, Li Xian refused, something he rarely did. He stood up from his chair and looked at Li Yi, saying, "I've been racking my brains for the past few days in the king's residence, working through the night until dawn. Finally, I've created something that can allow people to fly." What? Now it was Li Yi's turn to be shocked. It had only been a few days and this guy had made an airplane? It was impossible. It was impossible for him to understand Bernoulli's principle, and it was impossible for him to know anything about aerodynamics. Unless he was God, no one could build a plane by throwing stones and leaves from the roof, let alone in this age of ignorance. Even the most primitive and simple airplane was impossible. The Wright brothers invented the first real airplane, which only appeared at the beginning of the 20th century. Compared with most of the ancient people, Li Xian was very smart, but it was impossible for him to make something that was 1,000 years ahead of time. Soon, Li Yi saw Li Xian's airplane. It turned out that the thing that could let people fly was a huge kite made of cloth. A guard of the prince's mansion ran a few times, grabbed the kite, and jumped down from the roof of the 2-story attic. After gliding in the air for more than 10 meters, he landed steadily on the ground. Li Yi blushed because he almost believed Li Xian's words. This was the thing that he made after thinking hard and staying up all night? It was just a big kite. Even if a pig was tied to it, as long as the angle was good, it would be able to glide in the air for a certain distance. The guards would be fine even if they directly jumped down from the 2-story building. They were used to going up and down, so this height was nothing to them. I think that if they jumped off the cliff, they might be able to fly even further. In the past, you said that people could fly in the sky with the help of external forces. I didn't really believe it, but now I believe it. Li Xian's expression was somewhat proud, as if he had done something very great. Hearing his words, the face of the guard who fell down from the roof turned pale. If they jumped down from the 2-story attic, they would only sprain their ankles at most. If they jumped down from the cliff, they might lose their lives. Li was a bit dispirited. He had completely lost interest in Li Xian's big kite. Even if Li Xian made a glider, he might be a bit happy, but it was better than this thing without any technical content. You'd better not let them jump down from the cliff. Your guards are good at fighting skills. If one of them dies, there will be one less guard. It's not worthwhile. Don't tinker with the kite anymore. When you're free, you should study the sky praying lantern. It's much more useful than making another big kite. Li Xian's guard looked at Li Yi as if he was looking at a savior. When His Royal Highness asked him to jump down from the cliff with the kite, he had even written his will. He tried to steal a native dog from the neighboring village and tie it to the kite. As a result, the moment he let go of the kite fell down. That dog was really miserable. If it was him, he might not be any better than that animal. However, dog meat was really delicious. He swore that it was the most delicious meat he had ever eaten in his life. Even His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was full of praises for it. Since then, the number of dogs in the prefectural city had been especially serious. Sky praying lantern? Li Xian's attention was diverted. He rubbed his chin and started to think about what Li Yi meant. The image of the sky praying lantern rising into the sky appeared in his mind. Li Xian was stunned and his eyes suddenly lit up. While he was immersed in his own world, Li Yi planned to go home for dinner. A while ago, Li Xian was still having a headache about his marriage. These few days he was in the mood to hide at home and make plans. It seemed like he had completely accepted his fate. An arranged marriage was not acceptable. From the looks of it, he seemed to be planning to dedicate his life to science. After a short moment of silence for his future wife, he could see his own house. A figure was pacing back and forth at the entrance of the house. He kept rubbing his hands and looked very anxious. Li walked over and asked, "Old son, what's wrong? Did something happen at the theater?" "Young master, you're finally back." Old son let out a long sigh of relief. Li was his backbone. He only felt confident when he saw him. "It's not just the theater. Our brothel outside is also in trouble." Chapter 278. I heard that there is a new play in the brothel outside the city. It's called A Chinese Ghost Story. It's better than The Painted Skin. Do you want to watch it together? I've seen it a long time ago. The theater in the city opened 2 days ago. It's a little slower outside the city. This time I came to listen to old Zhao talk about Wulin. At the entrance of a tile-roofed house outside the city, 2 men greeted each other with a smile and walked in side by side. "I want to watch A Chinese Ghost Story, but I'm afraid I can't today. I just came from there. The brothel is closed today. I'll come back early tomorrow." A person who came out of the house reminded them. "It's closed? What? What's wrong with those people? They don't want to earn money." People who like to watch plays and listen to songs inside and outside the prefectural city were surprised to find that the recently built brothels were all closed today. Those who wanted to watch new plays and listen to Wulin stories suddenly had nowhere to go. They could only go back home after cursing for a while. In the city, the well-received Chongping Street Theater also hung up a sign that it was closed today, making countless people leave in disappointment. At this time in the theater, a few managers of the brothels outside the city gathered there, frowning. "Miss Wan, we can't just close like this. These days, A Chinese Ghost Story is very popular. If we don't open for a day, we will lose 5 strings of coins." A gray-haired old man said with a sad face. As soon as the old man finished speaking, everyone's eyes were on the only woman present. On the surface, it was Old Sun who was in charge, but they all knew that Miss Wan was actually the one who had the most say when it came to big things. Before Wan Ruoqing could say anything, another old man slammed the table. His beard trembled as he said, "These despicable B***stards. It's not easy for the children to have enough to eat, and now they're plotting against us. We can't hand over the script. It's more important than our lives. They want to buy it just because they have money. This is robbery. Anyway, I don't have many years to live. Even if I have to risk my old life, I will splash their blood." Wan Ruoqing hurriedly said, "Don't worry, Mr. Qian. No one wants to hand over the script. No one wants to give it to them. Mr. Sun is going to solve this problem. He will not let those people succeed." Wan Ruoqing said, "It's difficult." The old man who spoke first sighed and said, "We have no power or influence. What can we use to fight against them? Those children are still lying inside." As soon as the old man finished speaking, everyone saw Old Man Sun accompanying a young man walking over from the back door. "How's the injured?" The young man walked over and asked directly. Everyone looked at the young man with a hint of doubt in their eyes. After looking at Old Sun, they seemed to understand something and their expressions changed. Wan Ruoqing came over and said, "We've already sent for a doctor. They only suffered superficial wounds. It's not a big deal. One of them broke 2 ribs and may need some time to recover." Li asked again, "Who did it? Did you find out?" "They are all famous ruffians in the city. They said that since we are in their territory and under their protection, we should give them money as compensation. We didn't want to provoke them and wanted to send them away with some copper coins. We didn't expect them to ask for 10 coins as soon as they opened their mouth. They also said that they would come to ask for it once a day." Dongzi and the others only argued with them for a while before they were injured. This time it was the gray-haired old man who spoke. His tone was very respectful. Seeing Old Man Sun and Miss Wan's attitude toward this young man, he knew that this young man was the benefactor who gave them a living. So he told them the whole story in full detail. "Why didn't you report it to the authorities?" Li looked at him and asked. Qing and Prefecture and even Anxi County had been divided into small districts by him. Each district had a special person in charge who was responsible for fighting and bullying the good. When he was working under County Magistrate Zhou, he didn't care what the bailiffs and bailiffs did. In order to fulfill the agreement with Her Royal Highness before he left the Yamen, he restrained those guys a lot. If there was any dereliction of duty or bullying the common people, he didn't have to do anything himself. Louis Shui would make them pay for it. The old man shook his head and said, "We can't report it to the authorities. Those ruffians often enter the yamen. If they are caught and locked up for a few days at most, when they come out, we will be the unlucky ones. Moreover, this time they were ordered by someone to make us hand over the script. We are all doing this for a living. Those people are so cruel." Everyone, including Old Man Sun, had worried expressions on their faces. The authorities wouldn't care about the life and death of these lowly actors. With the power of those people, if they really reported it to the authorities, they would be even more unlucky. They finally had something to look forward to. Were they going to walk into the abyss again? Old Sun's old face showed strong unwillingness. He seemed to have aged a few more years. Other than Li Yi, the one who was least worried was Ruoqing. Because only she knew that the person behind them wasn't just a weak scholar. In Ningguang Fu, he had reprimanded the new Jinshi in front of so many officials. He had offended many people, but he was fine. On the other hand, Cui Yinxin and Jiangzi hadn't been appointed by the imperial court. Their careers hadn't even started, but they had already reached the end. Old Sun and Old Qin were worried that after reporting it to the authorities, those ruffians would take revenge. Little did they know that the person those ruffians and idlers should be most afraid of was him. "Go back. Everything will return to normal. Do what you need to do. I will take care of these things." After Li Yi spoke, everyone looked troubled. Before the matter was resolved, those people wouldn't give up. As soon as they opened the door to perform, those ruffians would definitely follow. Before they could ask what they were worried about, a group of people suddenly rushed in from behind. The man in the lead cracked his knuckles and asked excitedly, "Young master, who are we looking for trouble this time?" In the morning, the doors of the theater and the brothel were still tightly closed. In the afternoon, they opened their doors to welcome the guests. There were still a few days before the new year. The New Year's goods had been bought. More and more people had nothing to do at home. If people were idle all the time, they would get sick. Therefore, many people would find something to do in these days. The brothel was a good place to go, especially the newly built ones. They attracted the attention of many people. They were already tired of those old things. Only something fresh like a Chinese ghost story could please them. Although there were two men who looked extraordinary in the theater, Old Man Sun didn't feel relieved at all. He glanced at the young man who was chatting with Miss Wan and could only sigh. So what if he could chase those ruffians away? He could chase them away once or twice. Could he chase them away countless times? They would always make a comeback. What should he do when that time came? Moreover, those ruffians who were looking for trouble weren't the main point. Those who were interested in the script were the ones who should have a headache. Old Man Sun patted his swollen head and an arrogant laugh was heard. "Old man, business is good. Have you raised enough money? I always keep my word. If you can take out 10 strings of money, I will leave immediately and come back tomorrow." Chapter 279. Accompanied by a burst of laughter, a few figures filed in from outside the door. The leader was a large man with a knife scar on his face. He wore a thin shirt in the middle of winter, exposing a large portion of his chest. The black hair covering his heart was almost growing to his neck. The other people also looked quite fierce. They were all ruffians and bullies on the street. There weren't many people who didn't know them. Although they had quieted down a bit because of the government, the fear that had accumulated in their hearts for a long time could not be dispelled in a short period of time. Because they had been disturbed from watching the play, a few spectators wanted to stand up and throw out the people who didn't open their eyes. But when they saw the situation at the door, they immediately sat back down and focused on watching the play, no longer daring to care about what was happening over there. If they provoked those ruffians, they wouldn't be able to live in peace in the future. This is Qing, and prefectural city. We have to abide by the law. We don't have 10 strings of coins. If you continue to be so aggressive, don't blame us for reporting it to the government. Old Sun looked at the two men walking over from the corner and felt a bit more at ease. He looked directly at the knife-scarred man and said this. "Oh brothers, did I hear wrong?" The knife-scarred man heard this and was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed loudly and said, "Old man, you dare to talk about the law with us? On this street I am the law." The ruffians behind him roared with laughter. The nobleman who gave them this task originally had connections with the government. Why would he be afraid of things like the law? They had already arranged everything. Even if they were arrested and sent to the county government, they would have a way to get out. The knife-scarred man pulled out a stool and blocked the door. He crossed his legs and looked at old Sunday. He said, "It seems that you don't care about what I said. I will say it here today. 10 strings of coins, not a copper coin less. Otherwise I will smash your broken theater." Smash the theater? Is this how you smash it? A voice suddenly came from the side. Before the knife-scarred man could react, a long stool flew from the side and hit him squarely in the face. A few bloody teeth flew out of his mouth. The knife-scarred man was sent flying. His face was covered in blood and he lay on the ground motionless. "Oh, it's an acquaintance." Fang clapped his hands and walked over. When he saw the knife-scarred man lying on the ground, he was also stunned. Although his face was covered in blood, that iconic scar indicated his identity. A few months ago, wasn't this the guy who wanted 2 of the son-in-law's money and was caught and beaten up by them? Kill of kill. Seeing their boss fall to the ground after the stool of blood was seen. Every year during the Qingming festival they would clear the weeds on his grave. They were hoodlums, not fugitives. They could extort a few copper coins in exchange for wine money, tease innocent women on the streets and take advantage of them. But when it came to murder and arson, they would never do it even if they were beaten to death. This was a matter of principle. He once had a few hoodlum brothers who had no principles. They did not behave like hoodlums and accidentally killed someone. Now the grass on his grave was 3 feet high. Every year during the Qingming festival, they would loosen the soil and weed out the grass on his grave. This. Old man Sun's face turned green, and his lips were trembling. Teaching these thugs a lesson was not a big deal. How did it lead to the death of a person? This. Old man Sun's face turned green, and his lips were trembling. Teaching these thugs a lesson was nothing. How did it lead to the death of a person? The death of a person was a big matter, and the audience in the theater were also in a panic. One after another they stood up from their seats. "Don't worry, he won't die." Fang patted old man Sun's shoulder and said indifferently. He knew very well what he did. At most, this guy's nose bridge was broken and a few teeth were lost. It was not that serious. "Big brother, you died so miserably." A young man knelt on the ground with a plop, and before his tears could fall, he received a heavy kick in the chest. "This daddy is not dead yet." The knife-scarred man crawled up from the ground. In this life he may not have experienced big wind and waves, but small wind and waves had never stopped. The scar on his face was left from when he fought with others. A mere stool was not enough to take his life. "What are you still doing? Beat him up, beat him hard. Today this daddy will break his 2 legs. Blood flowed down from his forehead, and his eyes were blurred. He didn't recognize any acquaintances. He just wanted to break the legs of the guy who had just ambushed him, and the matter of the 10 coins was temporarily thrown to the back of his mind. Seeing that his big brother was not dead, the young man who was kicked immediately got up from the ground, rubbed his chest and said loudly, "Didn't you hear what big brother said? Break their dog legs." As soon as the word dog legs came out, half of his teeth were gone. Fang slapped the young man's mouth and he flew out with his teeth. Just like the knife-scarred man just now, he lay on the ground without moving. The knife-scarred man wiped the blood from his eyes, and finally saw the man standing in front of him. The fierce expression on his face disappeared, and his whole body could not help but tremble. He would never forget that vicious beating for the rest of his life. Every night he would dream about that face and still have some lingering fear. Those people were all monsters, even more barbaric than wild beasts. If it was possible, he would never want to meet them in his life. Unfortunately, the heavens did not give them good luck. In the moment he was stunned, the brothers he brought all fell to the ground and could not get up. This was such a familiar scene. The brothers with the best skills did not have the strength to fight back against these 2 monsters. They blocked a punch and the next moment they were kicked to the ground. If there were constables coming at this time, this nightmare would be as complete as the last time. As if they heard the call in his heart, a few figures wearing black clothes quickly appeared in front of him. Just as he was about to cry and complain, he saw the leader of the constables walk over and greet the man with a smile. He didn't hear what they said, but soon his brothers were chained up. After seeing the appearance of the leading constables, the knife-scarred man's 2 legs began to not listen to him. "It's better to offend the county magistrate than the king of hell." This was a sentence that everyone in the circle knew. The county magistrate naturally referred to County Magistrate Liu, and the king of hell, they mentioned, was also surnamed Liu. Although his name was Liu Yi, the chief constable of Anxi County government, he never showed mercy when dealing with criminals. It was said that during this period of time, the screams in the county government prison could be heard outside the county government. If they fell into his hands, it was really no different from going to hell. You arrested the wrong person, you arrested the wrong person. You can't do this, it's him who beat people, it's him. You can't arrest me, I know Magistrate Wang, I know Magistrate Wang. When the knife-scarred man was dragged away by the constables, he cried with snot and tears. Seeing King of Hell, Lu turned around and smiled at him. He immediately rolled his eyes and fainted. The troublemakers were all taken away by the constables and no one was killed, so the onlookers were relieved and went on with their business. The constables of the county government were obviously more dedicated than before, and they wouldn't help those ruffians to bully good people, which was a good thing. Those bastards who only knew how to bully people should be chained and locked up in the prison, never to be let out again. Seeing those ruffians being dragged away by the constables, Oldman's son was a little dumbfounded. Are they still the constables of the county government? They didn't ask the reason at all but chained them and left. It seems that those ruffians will suffer a lot. When did the constables of the county government start to do good things? Oldman's son soon knew the reason. Your Honor. Lu Yi walked to Li Yi and saluted respectfully. Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said approvingly, "Not bad. I heard that you've solved several major cases during this period of time, and the security of the prefecture city has been maintained very well. Everyone knows that there's a Hell King Lu in the county government." Lu Yi blushed and said, "It's all because of your good teaching." In front of Li Yi, he was even more humble than in front of County Magistrate Lu, and he admired Li Yi from the bottom of his heart. Lu Yi was very clear that he could have today's status because of the county magistrate's important position, which made him become the chief of constables in charge of all the bailiffs in a short period of time, from a constables who just ate and waited for death in the county government. Even when the county magistrate was not in the county government, what he did was what a county magistrate should do. Even the constables of the county government would sometimes ask him to go over when they encountered difficult cases. The county magistrate's kindness of enlightening him and the appreciation of him, there was nothing he could do except to earnestly perform the task assigned by the county magistrate. Listening to the conversation between the constables and Li, Oldman's son found a stool and sat down, his legs and stomach trembling. County magistrate, it turned out that Li was the county magistrate. No wonder Miss Wan didn't worry about those ruffians from the beginning. It turned out that she had known about it. Oldman's son didn't complain about Wan watching. The less they knew about the affairs of the big shots, the better. At this time he didn't worry at all in his heart. From now on they also had a backer behind them. Presumably, those guys who went to the brothels outside the city to look for trouble were all chained up with iron chains like dogs, right? Are your dog eyes blind to bully the county magistrate? If they don't lose a layer of skin this time, I will write the word son upside down. And those greedy guys who stretched their hands too far would be chopped off. No way, did you really give them 10 strings of coins? When Oldman's son cursed in his heart, a surprised voice came from the door. He turned his head and saw a man in luxurious clothes coming in. The man looked around the theater a few times, clicked his tongue and said, "I really didn't expect that such a shabby place could actually collect so much money. Leader Wu, this thing was done by you, right?" Oldman's son's anger was aroused again, and he looked at the man and said, "What thing?" The man in luxurious clothes sat opposite to Oldman's son and said with a smile, "I just heard that Old Son's theater earns a lot of money every day, and those ruffians deserve more protection and money. I just didn't expect that. I still underestimated Old Son's ability. A straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. It's boring to be a coward." Oldman's son poured a cup of tea for himself, glanced at the man in luxurious clothes, and drank the tea in one gulp. He was no stranger to the man in luxurious clothes opposite him. The man was also an actor, but he was different from them. Wandering actors like them, in order to make a living, drifted around like duckweed without roots, and their lives were the most miserable. There were also actors in the palace, and there were also private actors in the homes of the high officials and nobles. Although these people didn't have much freedom, their lives were much better than theirs. As for those powerful troops, although most of them performed for the high officials and nobles, they never lacked freedom, and the money they earned was also incomparable to theirs. The man with the surname Wu was the leader of a famous troop in the prefectural city. Seeing that Oldman's son's face was indifferent and directly pointed out the topic, a trace of annoyance appeared on the man's face, but he quickly returned to normal and said, "Since that's the case, I won't beat around the bush. 10 strings of coins, how many books like Painted Skin and A Chinese Ghost Story do you have? We want all of them." Oldman's son's expression didn't change, but he was sneering in his heart. These books were all written by the county lieutenant, and he was sitting there now. If the man with the surname Wu had the ability, he could go and find him himself. Wanting to buy food for everyone with 10 strings of coins was simply a dream. Even if he agreed, the county lieutenant wouldn't agree. The man in luxurious clothes looked at the almost empty theater, and a trace of passion appeared in his eyes. Even such a rundown place had so many people. If it was his troupe, the scene would be even more lively. It was a waste to leave such excellent books here. He had already done his research. These new plays did not exist in the market at all. Although they would be able to imitate most of them in a few days, they would still lose the initiative. When the time comes, everyone would have seen the original play. Who would still watch them? Give up. Don't mention 10 strings of coins, even if it's 100 strings of coins, we won't sell it. With the backing of a big shot, Oldman's son was full of confidence. The man in luxurious clothes narrowed his eyes and said, "So, you plan to take out 10 strings of coins every day. Maybe it will become 20 tomorrow. So it was you who played tricks behind the scenes." Oldman's son sneered and said, "Don't worry, they won't come again. A few officials came and took them all away." "So what if I did it? Even if I didn't do it, someone else would. You don't think the government will really care about these things, do you?" The man in luxurious clothes looked at him mockingly and said, "You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. I hope you can still stand here when you see them tomorrow." After the man in luxurious clothes finished speaking, he suddenly felt a chill on his neck. An iron chain was hung on his neck. The constable locked the chain and said lightly, "Since it was done by you, it's easy. Come with me." Louis's words were cold, without a trace of emotion. Chapter 280. There were only 3 days left until the end of the year. The closer it was to the new year, the easier it was for something to happen. The commoners in the prefectural city had already seen several groups of people with iron chains around their necks. They were all arrested and about to be dragged away. They were all familiar faces. Many people clapped their hands in glee when they saw hoodlums who did not do their jobs all day long being locked up in jail. This time, the other hoodlums in the city immediately calmed down. They obediently stayed at home and did not dare to wander around. Dao Ba and the others were all taken away. It was said that it was an order from King of Hell Lu. Dao Ba would be severely punished even if he did not die this time. It was better for them to behave themselves. Who knew if the iron chains would suddenly wrap around their necks? A theatrical troupe in the city suddenly closed its doors. The other troupes followed suit one after another. Only the theaters in the city and the brothels outside the city were still bustling with business. There was an endless stream of spectators. One group after another came and went. Everyone, including Old Sun, felt reassured when they saw the hoodlums who caused trouble being taken away by the officials. Now, even if they were to open brothels all over Anshi County, they would not encounter any obstacles. Who would have thought that the young man standing behind them was the county magistrate? Which hoodlum would dare to be reckless? Li only asked the constables in charge of this street to pay more attention to this place. From today onwards, Old Sun and the others would most likely not encounter any obstacles. Perhaps it was because it was the new year, they did not see the young girl who had become their disciple these few days. Recently, it was a busy time for the women and children. They cleaned up the dust, said goodbye to the old and welcomed the new, and used flour to make all kinds of shapes. On the 30th day of the new year, the residence was already decorated with lanterns and colored banners. Regardless of ancient times or modern times, the new year was the most important festival of the year. On the night of the new year, the family could gather together for a reunion dinner. This meant that the family would still have a surplus at the end of the year. It was the happiest and most satisfying thing. Today was a special day. The streets in the city were not very lively. The shops were only open for half a day. When the sky turned dark, everyone returned home to prepare a sumptuous New Year's Eve dinner. After closing the door of the residence, the inside became a world of its own. For the naughty children, today was the happiest day of their lives. As long as they didn't cause too much trouble, their parents chose to turn a blind eye. After nightfall, a bonfire was lit in the outer residence. The naughty children kept throwing bamboo into the fire, listening to the crackling sounds of the bamboo. They competed to see who threw the bamboo into the fire with the loudest sound. This was the most traditional firecrackers. As for the nice-looking fireworks, they were too expensive. His parents could not bear to buy them. They could only watch as white light shot out from other courtyards explode in the sky. Every sound would cause the naughty children to scream. Li didn't have time to watch the fireworks. He was tired of all kinds of large-scale fireworks displays in his previous life. The scene here was too small and it didn't arouse his interest at all. In order to prepare a sumptuous New Year's Eve dinner, the whole family was busy in the kitchen. For the remaining dozen or so families in the mansion, this might be the most extravagant New Year's Eve of their lives. Even for the poorest family, there wouldn't be a single chicken, duck, or fish missing. The family didn't lack money. It was fine to be frugal during normal times, but now wasn't the time to be frugal. Li Yi moved a small stool and sat in the corner to prepare the fresh fish that he bought this morning. How could such a grand occasion miss out on sweet and sour fish? Xiao Huan added firewood to the stove. Rui blanched the cut meat in the water before scooping it out and placing it on a plate for later use. Beside the table, Rui's knife danced in the air, and the tofu was cut into triangular shapes with uniform size and thickness. This was the only work she could do in the kitchen. Tonight, apart from Miss Lu, everyone would be able to cook 2 dishes. Xiao Huan had already been trained by Li Yi. In this world, she had already become an existence of the level of a chef. Needless to say, Rui's cooking skills couldn't even be compared to Li Yi's. In just a short while, the table was filled with dishes. In the past, it was Xiao Huan or Rui who cooked. Li Yi and Rui only needed to move their mouths. Perhaps it was because the 3 people in the family were cooking and she was the only one standing at the side waiting for dinner. Mississippi Lu insisted on showing off her cooking skills. In the end, there was a plate of black substance in the middle of the table of delicious dishes. Li Yi found it hard to imagine that the black substance was Lu Rui's fried chicken chops. She had clearly covered the chicken in flour and fried it in oil before scooping it out. Such a simple procedure had resulted in such a product when it came to Lu Rui. Li Yi picked up the chopsticks and praised Rui's soup. The heat was just right. Xiao Huan's cooking skills had improved again, but she was unwilling to touch the charred substance. Try the dishes I cooked. Mississippi Lu picked up a piece of chicken chops and put it in Xiao Huan's bowl. Her eyes were fixed on him. Xiao Huan's pretty face turned pale. The thing she worried about the most had happened. She ran away quickly with the excuse of stomachache. Seeing that Rui's eyes were already looking at him, Li Yi's expression changed. Before he could react, there was an extra piece of black substance in his bowl. Mississippi Lu obviously didn't intend to let him go. It was her first time to cook. If he disgraced her this time, she might take revenge on him next time. Weighing the pros and cons, he felt that it was nothing to eat a little charred food. Eating charred food could make him rich. This was the principle his grandma told him when he was a child. Although it had never worked, maybe it would work here. A good fried chicken chops tasted like charred food. Li Yi had a new evaluation of Mississippi Lu's cooking skills. Such a girl could only be married in the future. In this world, a girl who couldn't cook would be driven out by her family the next day. How is it? Lu Rui looked at him and asked. Not bad. Li Yi picked up another piece and put it in her bowl. He said, you try it. After tasting her masterpiece, Mississippi Lu went to rinse her mouth with a gloomy face. After Xiao Huan came back, she quickly put the charcoal back when she was not there. She patted her little chest and looked like she still had a lingering fear. After rinsing her mouth, Mississippi Lu threw those things into the dustbin and didn't mention anything about cooking. After dinner there were more activities. Xiao Huan and a few close friends were carrying out some secret activities. Li Yi lit the fireworks, which caused the naughty children to scream around him. There were explosions in the sky from time to time. Since he could remember, it was the first New Year's Eve without the Spring Festival Gala. It passed just like that. When the bell rang in the distant night, history turned to a new page. Time officially entered the 2nd year of Jianghu. Li Yi carried the little servant girl who was sleeping on the night of the New Year and gently placed her on the kong. After covering her with the quilt, he quietly left. The fireworks in the distance were still brilliant. There was no ban on setting off fireworks and firecrackers here, and there was no need to worry about the haze. Li Yi stood under the porch and looked at the night sky in the distance. He didn't look away for a long time. The last time he saw something like this, it wasn't this sky. A long robe was draped over his body. Li Yi retracted his gaze. When he turned around, he embraced the woman in front of him. Under her slightly startled gaze, he held her hand and led her into the room. Chapter 281. When he was washing up in the morning, Li Yi found some blood under his nose. Recently he was indeed a little angry. After a few nights of improving their relationship, he could even sleep in the same bed with Rui at night. However, every time he was about to reach the last step, she would sleep in another bed. This was a sin. Li Yi even suspected that she was deliberately teasing him, but he could only sigh in his heart. When would these days come to an end? During the spring festival in the previous years, he had to visit his relatives and friends from the second day of the new year. He had to give money to the younger generation until his hands were tired. This year he didn't have to go through this process. He came here alone. Although he was from the Li family village, he didn't remember the past. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was unfamiliar with the place and didn't have any sense of belonging there. Rui also didn't have any relatives here, so he spent the spring festival very leisurely. From the third day of the new year, the girl named Yang would appear at home on time. She was diligent and would appear wherever there was work. She would come early in the morning and only go back at night. She had completely put on the identity of a servant. It seemed that she wanted to use this method to impress Rui. Sometimes when Rui was practicing, she would stare at him without blinking. Rui also didn't chase him away, which made Li Yi feel a little strange. He didn't know what she was thinking, but he didn't intend to care. Whether she accepted a disciple or not was her business. These days he had his own things to do. This half a month was the busiest period of time in Qing and prefectural city. All officials, big and small, could not take a break. As the county magistrate, maintaining the security of the city was his main responsibility. The frequency of patrols on the streets had obviously increased. Every day they would deal with a few small cases. Fortunately, there were no major murders. With Lu Yi around, his subordinates could handle everything. When there was nothing to do, Li Yi would drink tea and read books in the county government office. It was extremely worry-free for the county lieutenant to do this. Daniel had been walking back and forth in front of Li Yi for a while, which annoyed Li Yi. Since he could get out of bed after his wounds got better, he ran to the government office to report. In addition to going to the brothel, he was also honest. However, no matter how honest he was, Li Yi wouldn't allow him to keep walking in front of him. He put down the book, patted the table and said, "If you want to walk, go outside. Arrestor Lu needs people. If you have nothing to do, go and help him." Daniel finally stopped and said with a bitter expression, "Sir, Arrestor Lu and a few brothers have been trying to catch that thief for a few days already, but they haven't even seen his shadow. Every night there are big houses being robbed, so that thief is probably not easy to catch." Seeing that the teacup in front of Li Yi was empty, he hurriedly ran over and filled it for him. He said with a flattering face, "I'd better stay in the county government office. I can still help Milord pour a cup of tea." After spending so much time together, Daniel had already figured out the county lieutenant's temperament. Magistrate Li was not like the previous county lieutenant Zhou, who always had a stern face and often scolded them. The current county lieutenant was not only more capable than the one surnamed Zhou, but he was also very approachable. Even if he saw them slacking off, he would at most give them a kick in the butt. Last time, Milord Li took the knockout drug from him and gave him a lot of money as compensation. He couldn't refuse it. He was not like Zhou Pixiu, who only gave money to his brothers but never gave it out. That bastard deserved to be put in jail. As soon as Daniel filled up Li Yi's teacup, there was a commotion at the door. Several constables walked in dejectedly. Seeing their bruised and swollen faces, Li Yi stood up and asked curiously, "What happened to you guys? How did you end up like this?" Although constables didn't even have a rank in the county government office, for ordinary people, they were considered half an official. Beating up a constable was a much more serious crime than assaulting a police officer in the future. Not only could they enjoy a free tour of the county prison for a few days, but they could also be given a free beating. Was really worth it. "Milord, that female cat burglar was really powerful. We had already caught her by following the clues, but who knew that she was so good at kung fu? She accidentally escaped." One of the constables said gloomily. Not only did they fail to catch a thief, they were beaten up by a thief. Moreover, it was a female thief. It made them feel a little embarrassed. "Where's Louis?" Li Yi asked. "Constable Lu asked us to come back and call a few more brothers." He had already confirmed the female thief's residence. The constable clenched his fist and said with hatred. Listening to his description, the female cat burglar should be skilled in kung fu. He was afraid that they, who were just dabblers, would not be able to deal with her. The possibility of them being beaten up was higher. His subordinates were beaten up. Li Yi also felt embarrassed. Today, Fang's wife brought Zhuzi back to her parents' home to see her mother-in-law. Fang was idle at home, so he brought him along to suppress the situation. This task obviously made Fang interested. He looked down on the constable's fighting power and strongly recommended Lu Yi to be the constable. If he became the constable, he guaranteed that the constables in the yamen would not be beaten up like this again. Lu Yi pretended that he didn't hear Fang's words. The position of the constable wasn't something that could be done with a fist. It needed to be done with a brain. He was too lazy to deal with those who only knew how to use brute force. He cupped his fists and said to Li Yi, "Although that female cat burglar comes and goes without a trace, there are always times when she is careless. I investigated a few pawn shops in the city and found that there were a few items that were being traded. They were the items that the rich families had lost. That female thief is also smart. She pawned at a different pawn shop every time. A few of my brothers waited for her for 2 days and finally found her. However, the thief's skills were very good, so we suffered a loss. However, this subordinate has already tracked down her residence." Lu Yi brought a few constables and led the way in front. Li Yi and Fang followed behind. With Fang around, Li Yi didn't plan to join in the fun. He just wanted to see what the female cat burglar looked like. Taking advantage of the dark and windy night, leaping onto roofs and vaulting over walls, robbing rich families, robbing the rich to give to the poor. This was the standard routine of chivalrous men in Wuxia novels. The person in front of them might be such a chivalrous woman. As for Li Yi himself, in the novels, he was a villain who only knew how to plunder the people's wealth and went against chivalrous men. His ending was usually not very good. As the few of them walked and entered the northern area of the city, the houses were obviously low and dilapidated. Li Yi remembered that Daniu's family lived here. "Sir, it's here." Lu Yi pointed at a dilapidated courtyard in front of them and said softly, "A brother in plain clothes followed her from afar and saw her enter this courtyard." Li Yi waved his hand and 2 constables kicked open the door. The constables immediately rushed in, unsheathed their weapons and looked at the courtyard vigilantly. After all, she had suffered a great loss at the hands of the female cat burglar. No one would look down on her just because she was a woman. In the courtyard, more than 10 children were gathered together, holding buns in their hands and chewing on them. Seeing so many constables coming in, a 7 or 8-year-old girl was shocked and accidentally dropped the bun on the ground. After being stunned for a moment, she immediately picked it up and hid it behind her clothes. "Hey, female thief, you are already surrounded by us. Hurry up and surrender." One of the constables looked at a girl who was about 16 or 17 years old and shouted loudly, "Sister, run." Seeing that the constables had barged in with knives, a boy's face changed and he shouted loudly. A few boys immediately ran out from the crowd. The oldest was about 11 or 12 years old, and the youngest was only 7 or 8 years old. At that moment, they were all baring their teeth at Lu Yi and the others, as if they were going to charge at them at any time. "Why is it her?" Fang's mouth was wide open. He looked at Li Yi with a face full of surprise. Seeing that the children had fierce expressions and were staring at Lu Yi and the others, Li Yi realized that he had actually guessed correctly. Chapter 282. On New Year's Eve, the entire prefectural city was in a state of jubilation. Everyone, including the rich families, let down their guard. Perhaps even the thieves wouldn't want to steal at this time. The heroine who robbed the rich to help the poor took this opportunity to climb over the high walls and steal the people's belongings. It wasn't for personal gain but to help these helpless children. When she pawned the belongings, she had to be careful not to be discovered by the dog official and his henchmen. If something happened to her, the children would have to beg outside. It was obvious that she had made a mistake in the end, and the dog official led a group of constables to chase her here. Li Yi felt that he was the dog official in the story. It couldn't be more appropriate. No wonder he hadn't seen Yang Liuqing for 2 days. So she had been doing these things for the past 2 days. "Put down your weapons." With no other choice, he could only wave his hand at Lu Yishui and the others. Li Yi didn't think that robbing the rich to help the poor was a bad thing. In fact, he had wanted to do it himself. Moreover, the clothes he changed out of this morning were taken to be washed by others. It wasn't good for his subordinates to point knives at her at this time. "Take out all the things you stole." Li Yi walked over and looked at her. Although what she had done was reasonable, it wasn't legal. She had to give those people something. "No, they will starve to death." The girl looked up at him with a hint of stubbornness in her eyes. She shook her head. Li Yi looked at the dozen or so children behind her. The girls were hiding behind the boys and the boys were protecting them. They were still staring at him and the others. Although their bodies were still slightly trembling, they were all clenching their fists. Li Yi believed that if Lu Yishui and the others made a move, they would rush up the next moment. Only this time. Don't do it again. He glanced at Yang Liuqing and turned to walk out the door. Sister, aren't the officials going to arrest you? Seeing that the fierce officials had left, a girl around 7 or 8 years old walked out from behind and tugged at the corner of Yang Liuqing's clothes. Yang Liuqing touched her head and said, "Don't worry, the officials only hang up the bad guys. Sister is a good person, they won't arrest you." When the little girl heard this, a smile immediately appeared on her face. She took out a bun from the basket and handed it to her. She grinned and said, "Sister, have a bun?" Yang Liuqing took the bun from her hand and took a small bite. When he looked up at the door, the figures had already disappeared. What? Do you think I did something wrong and shouldn't have let her go? Along the way, Li noticed that Lu Yidong seemed like he wanted to say something several times but stopped. Lu Yi cupped his fists respectfully and said, "This subordinate can understand Milord's benevolence. However, this action is against the law. If word of this spreads, Milord will be in trouble." Li smiled and said, "The law is dead but people are alive. If we capture that woman today, perhaps those children will starve to death. Reason and the law are sometimes in conflict. How to make a decision. As long as you're not letting your heart down, it's fine." Seeing the county lieutenant walk away, Lu Yidong stood in the same place and fell into deep thought. Reason and the law. He muttered these words and a trace of confusion appeared on his face. After a long time, his confusion gradually became clear. He sighed. The jewelry that those rich families had lost was stolen by a great thief who roamed the various prefectures. The probability of getting it back was really too slim. Yang Luqing swept the courtyard once again and sat on a stone bench in the corner. She looked at the young scholar who was holding a book in his hands. The strange chair he was sitting on was swaying back and forth. It seemed to be very comfortable. It wasn't until today that she found out that this seemingly weak scholar was actually an official. When she indirectly asked the young maidservant, the other party proudly told her that her son-in-law was a county magistrate and that he was in charge of a lot of officials. Apart from the first day they had come here, the two of them had not interacted much with each other. His impression of the young scholar was that he was lazy. As long as the sun was good outside, she would see him lying on that strange chair. Sometimes he would hold a book in his hand and sometimes he wouldn't. He seemed to practice martial arts as well. He would practice for at least 2 hours a day, but she didn't know which martial arts he learned. His fist technique was soft and didn't have any strength. Maybe he was just learning it for fun. No matter what, she couldn't associate him with an 8th-rank official. However, he had a good heart. If he didn't let her go today, those children would be begging on the streets. Although she didn't know those children for a long time, since she saved them from the hands of the human traffickers, she didn't want them to go back to their previous lives. That's right, that strange fist technique. Her future master would sometimes practice it and he never avoided her. She really couldn't understand why she was so good at martial arts when she was the same age as her. She must be her disciple. If she could learn her skills, she should be able to take revenge, right? Li put down the book and looked back. That girl was in a daze again. He didn't expect that she was the female cat burglar. He heard that a lot of rich families in the city had been robbed. At night, when he saw a woman in white flying around on the roofs, he would kneel down and beg, "Ghosts, spare me." Those children were orphans. In this era there were no orphanages. If it wasn't for Yang Liuqing, they could only beg on the streets. The possibility of starving to death was very high, especially during the winter. This kind of thing was not uncommon. He couldn't let her keep robbing rich families. There would be a day when she would be exposed. If he could find some work for them so that they could support themselves, it would be considered a good deed. When the sky gradually darkened, another day had passed. Yang Liuqing came out of the big house. When he was thinking about the 2 moves that he learned today, he heard footsteps behind him. "Master." She turned her head. When she saw the young scholar, she hurriedly bowed. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "After buying a place for them to live, there's not much left. If we use it sparingly, it should last for a month. If they are willing, we can let a few older people work in the theater, such as assistants. You know the theater, right? Cleaning the tables and sweeping the floor, doing some light work. They should be able to support themselves. If they are willing, they can let a few of the older ones work in the theater as assistants. You know the theater, right? Cleaning the tables, sweeping the floor and doing some light work. They should be able to support themselves." Li Yi nodded. Chongping Street Theater. Just say that it's my idea. They will help you arrange it. Li nodded. Chongping Street Theater. Just say that it's my idea. They will help you arrange it. Joy appeared on Yang Liuqing's face. When he was about to thank him, several figures came over. Li planned to go home and hide for a while. He didn't know how far Li Xian's airplane research had progressed, and whether he had used the Kongming lantern to take the dog into the sky. Based on the current conditions, without the right materials, the hot air balloon thing couldn't be realized. Even if he asked him, it would be useless. I'm leaving. Unexpectedly, Li Xian didn't come to ask him how to fly into the sky. Instead, he went straight to the point with a dispirited look on his face. Li Yi's expression changed slightly and he hurriedly said, "Isn't it just marrying a woman I've never seen? It's nothing. It's all the same even if she's covered with a blanket. Besides, you said that the woman is an outstanding beauty. No matter how you look at it, it won't be a loss. Don't take things too hard. It's not because of this matter." Li Yi's expression changed again. "Could it be that you have an incurable disease? This is a bit troublesome, but don't give up. You are the son of King Ning. What kind of famous doctor can't you find? Don't give up treatment. I'm going to the capital," Li Xian said with a long sigh. Li patted his chest and glanced at him. "This old man can't even speak clearly. Go to the capital, go to the capital. It's not like you're going to hell. Do you have to be so desperate and want to commit suicide?" Chapter 283. Winter was not a good season to bid farewell. There had been no snowflakes since the spring festival. Otherwise, he could copy Shouying Jing's poem for him. Song of White Snow sends Li Xian back to capital city. The north wind blows the white grass and it snows in August. I'm leaving tomorrow. Tonight I'll treat you to a drink in Jade's yard. Don't go home until you're drunk. Li Xian waved his hand and said straightforwardly. Li did not understand how his jadeite yard came about. He went to jadeite yard to listen to music, he went to jadeite yard to eat, he went to jadeite yard to drink, but strangely he never did anything serious there. Forget about Jade's yard. Let's go to Rui yard as usual. Drunkenness would cause trouble. It was okay in his own home and nothing would happen. But in a brothel, Li was really worried about his chastity. Don't be so wishy-washy. What's so good about Rui yard? Let's go to Jade's yard. Li Xian took the lead and two guards carried Li Yi, who was very reluctant. In Yang Liuqing's surprised eyes, they soon disappeared. The night was always the busiest time in the brothels, especially on the 1st and 15th day of every year. It was the day when the brothels competed for the courtesan bell. All the famous courtesans tried their best to get a high ranking. This was a great help to improve their fame and value. If they could become one of the top 10 courtesans, they would be pursued by countless people in the following year, and they would gain both wealth and fame. For their girls, all the brothels actively cooperated with the publicity. Prostitutes, who were rarely seen, performed on the stage one after another, which naturally attracted the attention of a group of wolves. When the beauties glanced around, they wanted to empty their pockets. The business of a brothel in one day was comparable to that of 10 days or half a month before. Only artists were qualified to run for the title of courtesan belle. A withered flower could not attract the attention of those nobles. If one of the top 10 courtesans could settle down in his brothel, the next year's wealth would definitely roll in. Every courtesan was a cash cow for the brothel to which he belonged. Within the jadeite courtyard, after passing through the winding corridors and isolating the noise outside, a woman stood quietly by a table in a secluded room. Her wrist slowly moved as if she was drawing something on a piece of paper. "Drunken Mo, you can't always not go out to meet the guests. The courtesan competition has already started. Mom is relying on you to make us proud." The jade courtyard's madam stood beside her and urged. "Don't we still have Xiang Xiang and Miao Miao?" The woman added a few more strokes on the paper and said casually. The brothel keeper's face turned bitter as she said, "Oh, my great aunt, how can they compare to you? Listen to Mama's advice, go out and show your face. Even if it's just to play a song or sing a few lines, it's good enough. How many young masters want to see you by name? Mom is doing this for your own good. If you don't win the title of courtesan belle this year, your future days will be difficult. Without fame, Mom won't be able to stop those nobles. Got it?" The woman sighed helplessly. "That's good. Mom will go prepare now." A smile immediately appeared on the madam's face and she hurriedly retreated. Her personal maid, Xiao Chui, supported her chin with one hand and murmured, "Young miss, I heard that Lu Xiaoqiao of Yichuan Brothel and Lu Yi of Golden Phoenix Courtyard have the most support for this year's courtesan belle. Many famous scholars have written poems to praise them. Young Master Su gave Lu Yi 3,000 taels of silver, and many people are envious of her. Yang Yanzhou wrote a poem for Lu Xiaoqiao, and her supporters immediately surpassed Lu Yi's. Young Miss has never met those scholars. What will you do if you don't win the title of courtesan belle? The maid's worry was not without reason. The courtesan belle election was obviously based on popularity. If a noble spent a lot of money on a certain lady, or if a talented scholar produced a masterpiece, it would greatly boost popularity. The courtesan belle was naturally the center of attention, and countless men would fight for it. If they met someone they liked, they just had to nod their head and their marriage would be settled. Those who didn't win the title of courtesan belle would naturally lose a lot of popularity. Without fame, those nobles wouldn't care if you were a virgin or not. Sometimes they would even use some forceful methods and no one would stop them. A virgin who lost her virginity was naturally no longer a virgin. In the end, she would end up like most prostitutes, selling flesh for a living. Xiao Chui was still murmuring to herself. Zheng Zumo came out of her cage-like room and looked up at the sky outside the window. A trace of desire appeared in her eyes, but it quickly turned into helplessness. Xiao Chui. The muttering girl raised her head. Prepare hot water, I want to take a bath. All right. Li Xian gulped down a cup of wine and stared at the stage, clapping his hands with all his might. After Li Xian's guard presented 2 silver ingots, the girl on the stage, wearing a gauze dress and revealing her navel, danced even more enthusiastically. There were almost no empty seats in the hall. When the 2 of them came earlier, there weren't actually any seats. After Li Xian's guard put his arm around a fat man's neck and said a few words intimately, the fat man smiled and gave up the seat that was supposed to belong to him. As the girl twisted her waist, a burst of cheers came from below the stage from time to time. Regardless of whether it was a burly man or a refined scholar, they all stared at the stage without blinking, as if they wanted to see under the gauze dress. Some even stared at the girl's navel and drooled. Li even saw a guy in the corner with his hand in his crotch, not knowing what he was doing. They were all a bunch of good-for-nothings. A simple twist of the navel was enough to make them so excited. Had they seen striptease or pole dance before? Even though he hadn't seen it himself, his horizons were at least 1,000 years ahead of them, so he wasn't as unbearable as they appeared. At this moment he was focusing on the delicacies in front of him. He had to admit that the dishes here had their merits. Putting aside those fancy dishes that didn't taste very good, this dish called Blaze of Colors was actually a side dish made of shredded radish mixed with an unknown substance. It was very delicious and went very well with the rice. Young master, look at him. He looks like he hasn't eaten for a few days. A chuckle came from the side. Li Yi turned his head and saw 2 young masters sitting there. At this moment, one of the younger ones was pointing at Li Yi with his finger. He was smiling so widely that he couldn't even open his eyes. He spat in his heart and turned his head away. A grown man actually covered his mouth when he was laughing. Perhaps he had some special fetish. If he looked at him any longer, he wouldn't be able to eat any more. Don't be rude. Seeing the other handsome young master gently open his hand, the action of a grown man was actually very seductive. Li Yi felt even more disgusted. He couldn't help but move a little to the side to avoid being affected by these 2 traps. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.